Well, welcome everybody to this fantastic occasion, because we were just talking before people were joining about the fact that this is day one of the UK Values Alliance being a community company. So it's our birthday, isn't that great? And whilst today is about looking forward and what we're going to be doing as an organisation, I thought it would be also a really good thing to look backwards at the same time. So it's a bit like driving a car, you know, you're definitely focused on where you're going, but every now and again, take a look in the rear view mirror. So Charles, you've got a slide there, which shows the leadership and also some of the people that have been involved in supporting UK Values Alliance since it started. And this was the brainchild of Maureen and Martin, who are here today, and we're going to hear from them shortly. So it's fantastic to have you. And in 2012, this started to blossom in their minds. And UK Values Alliance was actually formally started in January 2013. So that's 10 years ago, you know, a decade. And I was just thinking over the last few days that there are lots of people that have made the progress that UK Values Alliance has made in that time possible. And so here we have some of those people, and you know, their names and pictures might not mean anything to some of you, but perhaps when they're encouraged to have a look at the recording of this event, it'll remind them of the part that they had played. So we've got Jeff Dodds there, that's top left. And then moving down, Jazz Rasool, and so now the slide has disappeared from my screen, so I'm not.
Adam.
That's okay.
Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. Have you got it now?
Yeah, it's come back. Thank you, Charles. So Jeff and Jazz with Maureen and Martin and Lindsay and Liz and Diap. We're all there at the beginning, and we used to have meetings at Carluccio's Cafe at St Pancras Station in London. And then with Liz's help, we moved to the more salubrious environment of Old Mutual's office near St Paul's in London. And subsequently, we've been online, but recently had our first face-to-face event this spring since COVID. And there we've got, I mentioned Diap, Joy Rees, Charles, of course, Neil, who's with us today on the leadership team, Jackie and Bryony, and then also people to say thank you to in terms of them providing the support to get us to where we've got. And that's Louise Towler, who helped us to put the website together initially, Andrew Jagger, who created the visual identity, and also Suraj Soda, who helps us now with the website. So it's a bit unconventional for an online event, but what I'd like to ask you to do, please, is to come off mute, and can we give a real strong round of applause and cheer for all of these people and the fantastic effort that they've put in to helping UK Values Alliance. There we are.
Yay!
Congratulations! Happy birthday!
Happy birthday! And Alan, you forgot to add yourself to that important list, I think.
That's okay, Maureen. So now, before we get into the event, which is the purpose of today, obviously, we're absolutely going to take advantage to hear from the co-founders. So Charles, we can come off slide, that's great. And I've got two questions, Maureen and Martin, and either of you can go first. You decide that between the two of you. And what we would like to hear just in a couple of minutes is, one, what was your ambition when you created this entity a decade ago? And secondly, what would your advice be for us as we embark on this next chapter as a CIC? So either, well, I guess Maureen, ladies first, unless you'd prefer Martin to go.
I'm happy to go first, yeah. So thank you very much for inviting Martin and I to be present, and delighted that although we both got commitments today, we've got this short window in which we can speak to everyone, because I know what an achievement it is to become a CIC. And congratulations on that, because I remember tackling this many years ago and hitting brick wall after brick wall. So delighted for you all. As those who have worked with me over the years will know, I'm a reflector, and I've given thought to Alan's questions, which he kindly gave us earlier. And as a result, given that's a very short time and I want to be accurate in what I'm saying to you, I'll possibly read some of the notes I've made on that. So just to begin, certainly I'll speak for myself alone, and I'm sure Martin will do so also. Ambitions to co-create the UK Values Alliance. Well, I have to be honest and say, I think that was down to Martin, and I heard myself saying, yeah, okay, not really knowing what I was getting into, but really it was a fantastic journey and continues to be so, and met so many wonderful people. And as I think you probably know, the background to it was that Martin and I had been working alongside the Barrett Values Centre on a survey that they did on the values of people in UK society, looking at their personal values, what they saw in society and what they would like to see. And I think we were pretty shocked by the misalignment between their personal values and what they'd like to see. Compared to what they did see. And as I say, Martin initiated the thought to set up an organisation to address this mismatch and put values at the heart of UK society, which is still the aim of the UK Values Alliance today. So with that, the UK Values Alliance was born. And I kind of went along on Martin's coattails, as you say, and subsequently became made a contribution to making the UK Values Alliance work, and hopefully set it on its journey that it's followed so wonderfully from then till now. The second question about the guidance was much more difficult. What guidance would I give to the UK Values Alliance as it becomes a CIC? Well, in answer to this, I had to reflect on when the Barrett Values Centre survey was done exactly, and it was done in 2012. And that centre responded to say, oh, it was done in 2020. And I thought, really? So from that, I'm concluding there might have been a rerun of that. And if this is the case, it might be really interesting to look at the results now from 2020, because they may indicate a direction in which the UK Values Alliance might wish to go to help with their aims of putting values at the heart of society. So you'll see where people were at in 2012, and if 2020 does exist, that may give you some insights. And I know that engaging UK society is key to success. And so I said to myself, how can this be done? And I would turn my attention to World Values Day. I mean, I think as people that are intimately involved in World Values Day know, and I've been at a few of the meetings, I have huge admiration for how that's developed and what that's achieved. So I would suggest that the roots of that enterprise's success be examined and understood, and then a similar approach be applied within the UK. And I'm unsure of the extent to which UK citizens get involved in World Values Day, but looking at that information may also help direct the future approach of the UK Values Alliance. And I know enormous effort and funds have been put into World Values Day, and to mirror that success throughout the year, rather than just on World Values Day, which needs significant human and financial resources. But the new status of the UK Values Alliance as a CIC may open doors to these resources, and I'd keep my fingers crossed on that and I'd explore that. And during such exploratory thinking and research, what better guiding light to the future of the UK Values Alliance could be than their shared values? I mean, it's based on being initiators, collaborative, compassionate, learners, and practical. So I would use these in following these paths if you think there's any value in what I've suggested. And I will be delighted to watch what happens next, as I have been over the years. So thank you for continuing to take Martin's and my vision forward, and it touches my heart regularly to see how you do that.
Thank you so much, Maureen. So what you're saying to us is UK Values Alliance, follow your values. Pretty good advice, huh? So Martin, what about you? I'm guessing that you might agree with some of what Maureen has touched on, and you might add something different.
Wonderful. Yes, I love everything you've shared, Maureen. Lovely to see you, and thank you. Thank you for the invite to this. So yes, I love everything you've said and agree with it. And I'm going to sort of, I think, answer a little bit differently. So our ambition when we started this, another way of looking at it is we want a kinder, fairer, more loving world that we live in. So my ambition back then and my ambition now is that this is an entity that is fueling more love, more kindness, more fairness in the world. That's what I think we're here to do. And that values and the Values Alliance can be a catalyst in that journey. My guidance, now that you're becoming a CSE, I think it's wonderful, wonderful. I was deeply touched to get the invite a week or so ago. I think it's wonderful what you're doing. My guidance is, and again, I totally agree with everything Maureen said, but the first thing that struck me was be bold. Be bold. There is no greater time in the world, with everything that's going on at every level in the world, in society. There is no greater time for people living values. So be bold in your own evolution individually, in living your own values, in evolving your own values. Yes, continue to do that individually, and be bold as a CIC in bringing values to the heart of this UK society and also to the world. So with that, I say thank you. I do need to disappear actually back to where I was, but thank you so much, Alan and Charles, and lovely to see some familiar faces here.
Thank you, Martin and Maureen, and we understand that you're not going to be able to stay for the whole of the event. Hopefully you'll have chance to have sight of it, and we just really appreciate the fact that you've taken time out of your pre-planned activities to join us for this on our birthday. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, and thank you to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. So now we're going to get on to the main focus of today, which is the event. Before I hand over to Charles, I'd just like to ask you one thing, which is to be present. So don't just receive what the speakers are giving. Really be curious about what you're hearing and ask as many questions as you can so that we can have a really productive conversation on the back of what we're going to hear from these fantastic speakers. So see you later. Over to Charles.
Thank you very much, Alan. Welcome again, everybody. Great to see so many here today, or lots of familiar faces, but also new faces too, which is fantastic. So welcome particularly those who haven't taken part in a UK Values Alliance event before. We have a great few hours ahead of us. We have 3 hours now, 2 3/4 hours left. We're going to have 4 wonderful speakers who are going to explore values in action, and in particular how values can bring us together, which happens to be the theme of this year's World Values Day, but it's a perennial theme. How can values bring us together, and how do we overcome all the problems that, because it's not a straightforward thing, values don't automatically bring us together, sadly. each speaker will talk for 20 minutes in sequence, and then there'll be 10 minutes of chat, discussion, questions about that talk. If you have questions, if questions occur to you as the speakers are speaking, then do by all means put your thoughts, your questions down in the chat, or save them up until the talk is ended and it's time for the questions and answers, and then we'll pick out the questions from the chat, and we'll also call the questioners to any questioners to put their hands up and to add, like Alan's doing. I put your hand up like that in a sort of
Charles, apparently my picture is pinned, so that just needs.
Okay. Let me unpin Alan.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. That's remove spotlight. Okay. Good. Thanks, everyone. You've been seeing Alan, lucky people, for the last 15 minutes rather than each other. Sorry about that. Sorry about that, Alan. The perils of spotlighting at the wrong time. We're not very good at spotlighting. We'll see how we go. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question like Alan just did when we get to that point, or press the button under reactions. I think it's found. One way or another we'll find you. So I'm going to hand over now to the first speaker. Let me just introduce her first. And the first speaker is Heidi Bentley, who's been involved with youth and development work for 15 years or more in various charities and businesses, specializing recently in youth curriculum development and staff training and quality impact. What she's going to talk about, I think mainly today, is about her role as co-founder and director of the Congo Tree, which is a youth development charity operating in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which, as many of you will know, perhaps all of you know, all of us know, is a country which is unhappily afflicted with all sorts of very, very severe problems, including acute poverty, but also armed conflict, which has been persistent there, I don't know, Heidi, for many years, 20 years, more than 20 years, squabbling over natural resources, militias backed by countries from around the world. It's as a result, a very dysfunctional and disordered and quite dangerous society. The Congo Tree is a youth development charity, as I said, and it equips young people with life skills, transferable life and leadership skills, and then supports them, mentors them, and encourages them to get involved in the community. So it's really equipping the next generation to offer some hope in this difficult situation, and to change the story of that country, and bring the communities together, bring the people together, bring them, hopefully assist in bringing them out of poverty, out of this dire situation. So I'm going to hand over to Heidi. Heidi Bentley, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Charles. I am going to try to share my screen. We'll see if this works. I don't think it's going to, unless I can possibly take over as host, Charles.
Yeah, I thought I'd made you co-host, but you're now co-host, yeah.
Great.
There you go.
Hopefully. Can everyone see my presentation? Just checking. Fabulous. Hi. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Congo Tree, as Charles has said. But I'm going to talk about three things. We've been talking about how values bring us together. But these three things I'm going to pose to you. I'm sure they're things you've thought about as well. Values don't mean much unless they inform what you do. The next one, values can and should shift. And the next one, values can divide as much as they bring us together. So as Charles has already explained, I'm part of something called the Congo Tree. We are a youth development charity. I won't say much more about DRC, but we're working in the eastern part, which is still an active conflict zone. It is a part that is accessed because the land around it contains 30% of the world's diamonds, 80% of the world's coltan that's used in your phone to cool your batteries down, 50% of the world's uranium, which is not talked about a whole lot, amongst other things. It's got fertile soil, amazing people, but it's totally wrecked by humans' desire effectively to get wealth, get access to wealth. It's an interesting part of the world to work in, interesting part of the world to do youth work in. And I'm going to try and give you a few examples as we talk through those 3 points. Just to say, we run a program called the World Youth Leadership Development Program, so WILD program, and our mission is to equip, inspire and support young leaders in the Congo. We do a general leadership training, but really it's all about transferable life skills, building communication skills, problem solving skills, working together, and leadership with integrity, whatever that means for the people that are practicing it. We wanted to help young people get away from a sense of survival and dependency and to come to a place of autonomy and hope. We've now been operating for 10 years. We've trained about 1,300 young leaders in that time on a very small budget. And we train our alumni as both our staff, our facilitators for our program, and we are actually looking to hand over leadership responsibility to the team in DRC in the next 2 years. These are our values. I just thought I'd start from a point so you can understand where I'm coming from. This is what, when we set up the charity, there was 4 of us that set up the charity, 2 Congolese, a Canadian and a Brit, myself. And we set up a charity and we set ourselves 5 values. We set inspiration. So we believe everyone can be inspired and also be inspirational. And this can be in whatever environment that person is based in. We believe in creativity. We believe we're created to be creative. We try and do things creatively. We have Christ-centered as a value. This is an interesting one. We'll talk about it a little bit later because it's quite a divisive one, internally and externally for us. But our main principle on this is we want to reflect the value that we believe God has given to every person. But actually our programs are open to all young people from a faith background or none. We are completely inclusive in that respect. Youthful. Whatever age we actually physically are, we want to embrace the energy and vibrancy of youth, that viewpoint that change is an opportunity and not something to be scared of, and to look at the world with fresh eyes, with hope and determination. And together, which is quite apt for today, but we know that life doesn't really exist without teamwork. We think independence is great, but we think interdependence is brilliant. And that is what we're working to get towards. We love being together and we strive for unity. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how this works in practice for the Congo tree. For us, values inform what we do. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the program Hunted on Channel 4, where 14 pairs are sent off and they have to avoid capture for a certain amount of time. I was watching this the other day with my partner, and we saw values in action, because one team effectively let their guard down and let slip where they were because they were buying a thank you bouquet of flowers for their hosts. And I just thought that this was the most amazing, amazingly stupid, but amazingly beautiful moment of showing how values inform what we do. In that, your whole task is to complete the end of this challenge, but the value of being, thankful and grateful totally got in the way and derailed the situation. And I like to think that our values as the Congo tree inform us in a similar way. They have informed everything. They've informed how we've designed our program. So we would say the values of creativity, youthful, and together have designed our program. We run things in a very different way. We actually don't do a lot of talking at young people. We do a lot of working with them. So we'll explain a challenge. We'll give them a chance to try it for themselves. We'll get them to be creative, to think for themselves, and then we'll review it and discuss it with them afterwards, so that the learning and the teaching comes from the doing and not from someone just telling them what to do. Because young people, I don't know if you know, I like to still consider myself young. I'm not that young, but I like to still think, you know, that I don't like to be told what to do. I want to be able to explore it and appreciate it for myself, and I need to learn those lessons myself. So I think we took that into our program and said, young people don't want to be told. They want to experience, they want to adventure, they want to explore, and we designed a program that allows them the time and the space to do that. How we run our program and our organization is impacted by our values. We say that we want to stay youthful. So actually all of our staff members, all of our facilitators are not only young people themselves, but they are young people that have come through our program, and they can then choose to step into a role as a facilitator and be trained with us and stay another 2 years. They can take on an internship. And our assistant director, Mehdi, who will eventually be the director of the Congo Tree, has been part of us since the very pilot program 10 years ago. And he will step in as a young person at the age of 29. He will step in as a director of a charity and also be looking to train up who is next to take over from him. We're trying to allow that to inform how we run our organisation. How we tell people about what we do is also informed by our values. We want to be inspirational. We use photos, we tell stories that tell the amazing things that our young people do. We try not to use the sort of emotional hook taglines to try and raise money or to share about what we're doing. We're trying to share inspiration. Just by example, this is Arkanj. She's one of our young people. She herself let us know that the Congo Tree had been quite impactful for her personal development. She was training as a teacher when she started our training program. She got a job because she was able to describe what she had learned at the Congo Tree to a school. They then promoted her and actually moved her 300 kilometers away from the city that our program is based in a whole other country. She's based in Rwanda now in a school, but they wanted her to take on a position of responsibility and leadership. And she travels back to our monthly meetings, 300 kilometers once a month, to make sure that she is still a mentor for her young person, the person that she's mentoring, and to be an inspiration to them as a leader, as someone that could show her skills and talents from what we do. Equally, we like to share stories about when our young people get involved in the community and show that togetherness. We had a situation recently where there was a volcanic eruption. We've also had mass displacements because of conflict in Rutshuru. This area has been hit by everything you can imagine. And what we recognise in an area that's very dependent on humanitarian aid is that humanitarian agencies do an amazing job, but they can't get there within a very short space of time. They take a couple of days to get on the ground and working. So what our young people decided to do in an instant was to fill that gap. And they raised enough money to be able to go and do a food distribution within the first 24 hours of a mass displacement in a village, and to feed the people that had been displaced. And this for us was that sign of not only youthful and being creative, they came up with creative ways to raise money, but also to be really together and to be together with their community in a space that, you know, there was a gap, there was a need, and they wanted to reach it, to fill it. So values inform what we do. It's also how we develop new work. We come up with new programs based on what is kind of a need, a gap and a need, but also from what we set out to do. So we want to be creative and inspirational. So we have an artistic therapy program for trauma, trauma-informed therapy. And we've come up with enterprise and artistic programs that support our young people develop their skills, but from that base. One final example for us is our treehouse. This is actually a very new one for us. We have been evicted from our base as of just very recently, and it's a really tough one because when you've put down roots and you've created a new neutral, safe space for young people, you want to protect it, you want to keep it. And we spent at least a day going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And then we looked back at our values and we said, no, hang on. Our value of being youthful is to look at any change and anything as an opportunity and not a threat. How are we going to see this differently? How are we going to see this as a challenge and a chance to redefine or redesign what we do? And one of the options that came up to us is the potential of having a restaurant space. And we thought, well, isn't that amazing? We could have a training venue, but also potentially a business that could support our charity. And we're trying to look at what we do from the perspective of our values. But we also believe that practice informs our values. And in that case, we can look at shifting our priorities or shifting the values that are more important at one time or another. We've got a group of young people that came to us and approached us and said, we want to do more about inclusion, particularly around gender, but we want to do more about inclusion. Can we set up a group? And we said, of course, yeah, that's fine. We'll support you as best as we can. They want to run events and awareness raising, basically. That has actually prompted in us a 10-year review of our values, of what we state as our main values. And in that review, our young people informed us that they'd like to add inclusive. They didn't feel that together was enough. We wanted to add inclusive as a new value for us, not because we are completely inclusive, but because we want to be, because we recognize that our practice already was leading us in that direction, and we want to be really more intentional about how we become more inclusive. We've got a charity that works with those that are disabled, who are based in our office and work with us, and there's a large proportion of the albino community as well in Congo who are completely ostracized from most community events, but we wanted to reach out and make sure those young people had access to our program as well. We wanted to be more aware of the cultural issues around gender and various other things, and make sure that we were being intentional about sending applications for our program to places where young people could access it. So we have decided to include inclusive as a new value at this point. And I think it's really a good thing to continually think through and revise. What values are the most important to you both as a person and an organisation, as regularly as you feel you need? I'm sure we all do this as we face different situations anyway. And that brings me to the question mark that we have around Christ-centred. Maybe you can help us. Maybe this will be the thing that defines, in question and answers, you can help us decide what we're going to do. We've had a big question mark about whether we put Christ-centred in as a value. When we picked it, it was because our programme used the example of Jesus as a leader, not particularly from a faith background, but just as a leader, as a good example. Of being servant-hearted, as a good steward and a shepherd of others. And that's what we kind of based our programme on. But as we've gone along, and we've had a lot of young people come through from various other backgrounds, different faith groups and of none, they have challenged us, informed us, helped us to revise our programme. So now we're able to share examples from lots of other perspectives, both secular and faith-based. We have, for example, Islam. We have examples from Islam, from the Quran, and we have examples from humanism. We have examples of just good leadership, people that we recognise as good leaders within our programme, and we have consistently revised that. Now the question we have is Christ-centred actually a value or just a foundation or a method? Do we need to declare it in that way, and should we actually bring that out? And that's going to bring me on to values dividing. Values can both divide and bring us together, because the thing is, values set expectations for yourself and the expectations you have for others. Whether a person or an organisation matches up to your expectations or can meet your expectations kind of defines what your link is with that organisation or that person. So it's really important that we recognise that there is either division or bringing together, and actually neither of those is a bad thing. If you have a value that you hold strongly, you don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time around someone who doesn't value that as much. It happens in our natural friendship groups in our life, I would imagine, anyway. On the flip side, if we don't hang around with people who challenge us and have different priorities and values that are stronger to them, we don't open ourselves up to challenge. We don't open ourselves up to other viewpoints and other priorities which might inform our best practice. We are still in a quandary about whether we have something that is so openly faith associated as a value for us. For that, it opens up networks, particularly with churches, for fundraising, but it also divides us from not only our core goal of being inclusive and creating neutral safe space as a mission for our young people, but also has problems with other funding streams and things we face as a charity. So we're in a real battle about this one, and we're quite happy being in it. We are going to work through it together. We're going to work through it with a youthful vision and hopefully quite creatively to come to a conclusion as to whether that is something we want to still hold on to. And by taking it out as a value, we recognise it isn't a value to us, it just might not be our priority value.
Good.
I think values bringing together and dividing people can best be seen in some of the work that we do with our problem solving tasks. So as I said, with our young people, we set them challenges and we say, go and try this. What can you do? And you can see that one person might value winning more than potentially teamwork. And another person might value finding the best solution or the most effective solution over winning. And this can create both division or togetherness in teams. It can make or break teams, in fact. In order to allow it to make a team, we need people to both recognise, understand and value each person within that. Their skills, their strengths, their weaknesses, first and foremost. So for us, the value of together, which is where I'm going to end on this, the value of together is really at the heart of our leadership training. It's actually in the process of our teaching. We actually teach people to take the time to understand and appreciate each other so that togetherness is not trite, but actually genuine. So I'm just going to leave you with a thought. I think I've got about 3 minutes left, but I'm going to leave you with a thought around our value of together. How would you describe it? This is my creativity coming to us. How would you describe it? Imagine if you're writing a 3-line poem. What does together look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Can you taste it? What does together mean for you? And I hope that's a good place to leave us as we move on from me talking and someone else taking over. And just in case you need it, this is my contact details and a little bit of more information about the Congo tree. Our tagline is "Be part of the story," and I'm really grateful that you've let me be part of World Values Day story on such a great day. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Heidi. That's fantastic. Can you stop sharing? That's great. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Heidi. We've got a few minutes left for questions. So Bryony, I mean, first of all, let me say, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I think that the work you're doing in such difficult surroundings, taking on such a difficult task, rather puts our endeavours elsewhere, including in the UK. I wouldn't say so much in the shade, but it shows us that we shouldn't be discouraged or dismayed if problems are really immense, as they clearly and obviously are in the DRC. And it's just wonderful that you've made progress. And I know that from our chats, there's lots of examples of the success you've had with the Congo tree and the youth that you train and mentor. So let's just open it up for questions, and maybe some of that will come out. We had a question from in the chat from Bryony. Bryony, would you just check it through? Just one question from the chat. Bryony, would you like to ask that question directly, or shall I?
Yeah, I can just. I've written it in there. It's just that there are undoubtedly going to be values behind Christ-centered that are relevant to anybody, faith or none. So that was just my thought is, what are the values? And yeah, there's going to be something that is inclusive.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Bryony. And I think actually even that question will be a really interesting one to take back to the team, because we've kind of we've had the discussion, but it's never been put in quite that way, and I really appreciate that. As I said, the values for us of Christ-centered, we all did and do come from a faith background, a Christian faith background, but we're all on various journeys with that. And I mean, my journey in itself, I don't know where that will lead me, but I think that came from this idea that the model of leadership that was there, and the values of that leadership were being servant-hearted, being a good steward of resources, so looking after resources appropriately and well, and to lead others well, to be a good shepherd, and you know, some of that terminology. But even the terminology itself can be divisive, but the values there I think are good. You know, we want leaders who are not self-serving. We want leaders who are taking on a role of leadership to look after the community that they are serving. And so I think maybe going back to that and chatting through with the team will be really interesting. So I'm really appreciative of your question. Thank you.
Anyone else want to comment on what Heidi's been saying on that particular topic? Because she's sort of asked us, is she doing the right thing? Should they be changing their explicit commitment to those Christian values? And or any other thoughts or questions? Anyone else like to have a go?
I got a thumbs up from Arun. Thank you very much.
He's a big thumbs up. Thanks, Aaron.
And Thomas.
Charles, it's Lindsay. I've
Lindsay,
just one thought from me. I think you can be a faith-based organisation and still be inclusive. So if the service you're providing is open to everyone, you know, there's no reason why you can't still be faith-based. So I don't think those two values are in conflict, provided the behaviours that you're using to honour those values aren't in conflict. So I think there's nothing to stop you being faith-based and still opening up your programme to everyone, and therefore being inclusive. I think you can have a particular faith yourself and still be completely welcoming to people of other faiths. And I think as long as that's clear in your actions, as you described, you know, putting your values into action, as long as that's clear in your actions, then there's no conflict there for me. But you know, I think what you were saying just now is absolutely true. You could make it service as a value, couldn't you? You know, and that would be fine too. I guess it just depends whether the faith of the founders of your organization is important, and if it is, then keep it. You know, I think you can still be inclusive and maintain your faith. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Heidi, actually, something very similar to what Lindsay said. First of all, you're doing fabulous work, I think, your organization, and just about the talk of faith, right? So in India, we have so many different cultures and faiths in one locality, actually, right? In one community itself. And we do have the, you know, proven experience that no matter what, as long as your values are based on humanitarian or, you know, overall well-being for the community. And there's a lot of talk that we're doing right now with Charles and other teams for V20s all around volunteering and seva, right? So as long as it doesn't really, you know, hold any differences for people from different faiths, if they do choose to come to you, I think it shouldn't really matter, right? If you're all welcoming to everyone across different races, religions, I think that really showcases the success of an organization. So I think it's great work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minal. Any other thoughts on that topic, or just more generally on the work that Heidi's doing and her comments on values, or anything else? Anyone else like to contribute? On the together point, Chris Smerald, Chris, where are you? Can't see you on the screen, but there you are. Made a point that the values that came to his mind in relation to together are mutual empathy and support, which seems you know, a good comment. And Alan, you've been writing poetry, I think. Right, sure.
I just had a quick go, just so together, one circle, arms around, eye contact, heart connection.
Good one. Excellent. Anybody else want to go? Can we ask one? Maybe we've got time for one more question if no one's got one. Oh no, Stacey, you've got one. Great. Good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, thank you for that, Heidi. It was like music to my ears listening to everything you were saying. I also work with young people in schools and in the community as part of my work, and we do youth projects to talk about youth action and raise awareness about things that they care about. I also work for a values-based organisation, which is Cooperative College, And I just wanted to ask you, when you first make the contact with the young people and they first come to you, what does it look like when you're first presenting those values to the young people and help them to kind of understand what they are, but also what they mean to them? Because I do find that sometimes that's something I struggle with. So I just wanted to get your advice and your thinking around that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, thanks. That's a great question. It's actually something I didn't include in my presentation. I probably should have, but our values are obviously quite important to us, and what we have actually done is we've written sessions on each of the values, so actual like monthly meeting training sessions on each of the values that we have. And again, from the perspective of getting the young people to think through it for themselves first and then come and have a discussion with us about it. So we have a session on understanding your personal values and understanding what's important to you. We then have a session on group values and group culture, kind of with the aim of saying, actually, if you don't like the culture that's around you, how can you shift it? How can you as a team work to shift, for example, the culture in your family and the culture in your community, the culture in your school, the culture in your workplace? What impact can you have with your personal values informing that? And then we look at each of our values separately in a session through activities. And we've found that has been hugely popular, that our young people absolutely love, because they get a chance to firstly figure out what's important to them and then understand why we've said this is important to us. And it brings it together. I'm more than happy to, like, at some point chat through some of the content of those sessions, if that's helpful to you. But that is the perspective we've taken. We've started that journey with them.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much. That's really useful.
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you so much, Heidi. I think that's been absolutely fantastic and very eye-opening. Well done. Yeah, applause from Aaron and everyone else. Well done.
Thanks for having me.
And we're going to, Heidi's going to join us and the other speakers later in our final session, where we're going to have a general discussion with all the speakers and everyone else here. So please stay on for that. Next, I want to introduce Becky Park, as our next speaker. Becky is a psychology research fellow at the University of Oxford. And what she's working on is a fascinating project called the Oxford Character Project. And it's a 3-year project called Virtues and Vocations, funded by a very well-known funder who many of you will have heard of, the Templeton Foundation. And it's exploring the values and purposes that are the values and purposes that are central to good leadership. And they also design and deliver leadership development programs based on the research. She's a doctor, a PhD in positive psychology, where she did her thesis was mindfulness-based strengths practice, a toolbox for self-efficacy in higher education, which is I'd love to hear more about, but probably not right now, because I think she's going to talk about the character project. And she's going to speak to you now. So Becky, if I can hand over to you, you're going to, I think, show your own slides. So I'll hand over to you and see if I can spotlight you without making things confused again. Okay, done, hopefully. Yeah, there you are.
Great, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be here today and to speak with you all. And let's see if I can actually do that as a slideshow. Hooray! Can everyone see that?
I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Charles, for the introduction. Yeah, today I'm going to be presenting some results from this 3-year project that I've been part of at the University of Oxford. And I'll be talking about our values project, which has been looking specifically at corporate values and thinking about character and leadership within the context of UK companies, UK organisations. So I'll start with a bit of a brief history of who we are at the Oxford Character Project, what we've been doing. And then my main focus today is going to be on our UK Business Values Survey and some of the results from that in terms of what are the corporate values that are most common among UK companies. And then I'm going to be looking at some of the ways that different companies might try and embed these values within their organisations. Now, the UK Business Values Survey is very much just taking what companies say publicly about their values. Of course, that is not necessarily what actually happens in the companies. So I'm going to be drawing in some insights from some of our other pieces of research. So that is a leadership survey we've done with people working in these organizations and asking them, what does good leadership in your sector look like specifically? What are the features or the attributes? And then also drawing in some insights from our interviews as well, and finishing up with some conclusions. So to give you a brief introduction to the Oxford Character Project, the Oxford Character Project has been running since 2014 at the University of Oxford. And our primary focus until 2020, which I'll come on to in a moment, has been the design and delivery of character and leadership development programs, specifically for postgrads at Oxford. Now, unsurprisingly, we have a lot of postgraduates that come through Oxford that do end up in very high-powered positions around the world. And so our mission has been to engage with these students and get them to sit down and think about, why is it they want to be a leader? What are their motivations behind that? What are their personal values, and how are they going to try and live that out in the world? And we get them for 16 weeks, we take them through various different readings from different disciplines, different sectors, different case studies, asking them to think about things like humility in leadership. What is it? Is it important? How do they do that? Thinking about integrity and what integrity means to them. So very much trying to get them on the ground. Many of these people already have leadership positions in some way or form, but getting them to really think about what it means to be a good leader and be a leader for good in the world. Then in 2020, which is when I joined the project, we received a large grant from the Templeton Foundation on virtues and vocations. And this project has really kind of expanded dramatically the work that we've been doing. And we've been running a big empirical project looking at character, culture, values, leadership within our sectors of interest. So that has been tech, law, business, and finance. And the reason we chose those sectors is because about 25% of the students from Oxford end up in those sectors. And of course, they're very foundational to society. So, and we can't tackle everything. So we had to make a choice. So that's kind of the context we've been working with, and working with organizations and different industry partners to conduct research within those organizations. Quite often you might find in academic research, they very much use students as their samples, and we very much wanted to go to the industries themselves and then use those insights to continuously improve our character and leadership programs, as well as designing programs for organizations and putting out resources where we can to help them as well. So I'm going to talk through some of our main empirical pieces of research. So my role on the project is psychology research fellow. So I'm basically the data analyst. So I get given a bunch of data and I get to chew through them and analyze them and figure out what it all means, which I love. I absolutely love. Curiosity is very much one of my, I call it one of my signature strengths. I love just finding out things. So this very much suits me well. So the four main projects that we've been working on is, firstly, look at corporate values within the UK, and that's what I will focus on today. So looking at what companies say their values are, what they think they mean, and how they try to embed them. Then we've been conducting various surveys with people working in these organisations, asking them what did they think good leadership looks like. And then we've done lots of interviews. You see 128. I'm going to be presenting some insights from the business interviews from that as well. And as I say, all of that feeds into our programme data that we are constantly evaluating. So let me talk about the UK Business Value Survey. So this is a piece of work that we were doing really kind of just as we were coming out of lockdown, looking to find out what are the most commonly espoused values of UK businesses. And we're not the first to do this. There have been several other studies that have done similar pieces of work to this, primarily focusing either on global values, so values from the highest grossing companies across the entire world, or more focused on US values. And there's been one other UK focused value survey, which was done in 2015 by Maitland. Now, we wanted to firstly provide an updated version of that survey. So 7 years later, we published this actually at the beginning of this year, I think, or maybe the end of last year. But basically 7 years on from Maitland, how the values looking, are they similar, have they shifted? But we've also wanted to go one step further and not just find out what are the values, because at the end of the day, that doesn't tell us too much. But we were actually interested in, what do the values mean to these companies? So Heidi, it was great to see your example of values with your little blurbs next to it. We spent a long time analysing all of these blurbs and finding out how companies define their values, as well as any benefits they think values have, any effect of COVID. We actually had a few companies saying that because of COVID, they've completely reinvented their values or refreshed them, and how they embed them. And my background in positive psychology has been focused on character, and one of the models of character I've used in the past is the Peterson and Seligman's character strengths and virtues. Now, if you are aware of that, their website is VIA, which stands for Values in Action. And that's where we wanted to start. So we wanted to start with the company values. We found there was a bit of a barrier when talking about character to companies, but they were very happy to talk about values. So we wanted to start there with these firms. So we surveyed 221 companies, and we analysed not just the value statements on the website, so those lovely little single pages that say core value, little description. We analysed those. We also went through all of their annual reports and found any mention of their values, and that's where we've really got the information about what they think they're doing to embed the values. So let's look at some results. This is the, on the left-hand side, you've got all of the values that came up, and I've zoomed here on the top values that came up for our survey. So this is the top 14. And there are probably some that are very familiar to you, some you'd expect to see, like collaboration and integrity, all of these kind of, am I going to use the term buzzwords? I think I might. These kind of buzzwords that companies use to say, hey, look, we care about integrity. And this is interesting in and of itself when we compare it to previous surveys. And we'll come back to this slide, so don't worry. So when we compare our work to other surveys, we find a pretty similar pattern across the board. Those buzzwords, collaboration, integrity, creativity or innovation, very much consistent messages that companies are churning out again and again. And I will just say it is difficult to compare across different surveys because we have all grouped terms different ways. We very much tried to keep to the terms that companies used, but we ended up with hundreds and hundreds, so you have to kind of group them to make it manageable for analysis. And we had some that only used 9 values and grouped all of them under there, so it is a little tricky sometimes to compare. But it is interesting to see some of these similarities. But there are also some newcomers I'm going to talk about if my slide wants to change. There we go. So these 3 have cropped up, particularly in contrast to the 2015 results, where over the course of 7 years, something has begun to shift. There seems to be a bit more of a shift towards perhaps a more other-oriented focus, a focus on passion and meaning within work, and a focus on courage. And actually, what that was often defined as was doing the right thing, having the courage to stand up and say this is the right thing, or the courage to push forward. And these 3 did start to come up as well in the 2021 AMO survey, which looks at the global values. So there does seem to be a general shift moving this way. And I loved what you said, Heidi, that values can and they should shift. And I think we are beginning to see that. And I would love to do this again in 5 years or so and see again how they've shifted. Because the time we were doing this, we caught the annual reports of some who had put them out after COVID, and some of them that hadn't released a new one. So I would love to know how it would have genuinely changed over the course of COVID. That's a whole other conversation. It's also worth looking at what we've called the undervalued values, those values that are at the bottom. Now, as part of my research in my undergraduate and masters, I did a fair bit of research on humility. So I think it's very important, and it was a little bit soul crushing to see it so low on the corporate values. But on the flip side, it's on the board. Companies are thinking about this. You know, we had 221, and even if only 2% are thinking about things like curiosity and humility, that gives me a lot of hope that things are beginning, people are open to this and open to thinking about it. So we also looked at ways in which companies tell us that they try and embed their values. Now, the percentages here reflect the percentage of our sample that discussed each embedding strategy. So I'll go through some of them. Some of them might be self-explanatory. So there was policy. So this is where companies talked about their values being built into their policies, that their policies are aligned with their values. Some said that policies were actually judged by how well they fit the values. And whilst this seems like a really impressive statement, I would also like to point out that there is a requirement for UK publicly trading companies, I think on the FTSE, to state somewhere in the annual reports how their values, purpose and mission are aligned to their policy. So it was kind of a blanket statement, I'm going to be completely honest there. And at the end of the day, that's not particularly helpful. It's much more helpful when we get actual examples. But there were lots of talk around employee engagement. So that was hiring based on values alignment, having values embedded within training programs and induction programs. A lot talked about financial incentivization, but again, that was similar to policy in that it was usually a very similar sentence across the board about how bonuses were calculated based on how well certain people had lived up to values, or that it was just done in alignment with. So again, very surface level information we got on this. But there was a lot talking about how values and leadership driven, talking about the role of leaders to be the ones to communicate the values, to have tone from the top was the phrase that was used a lot. And actually how leaders are the ones who have this responsibility to make sure that people understand the values and can enact them. And various other things such as measurements, such as doing surveys within the company to see how well their values align with the employees and vice versa. Looking at exemplars, so having champions of specific values and rewarding staff for having kind of reward recognition schemes for those who really live out the values. Similar to behavioural focus, so using values as part of annual reviews, and so on and so forth. And what I will just say on behavioural focus, and I'll come back to this again and again, is that there was one particular company who was absolutely brilliant in on their values page. They'd probably gone a bit too far, but they had the values and then they had a list of about 10 or 15 very specific behaviours of what that value meant. Not generally, but for their leadership team, and then another 10-15 for their mid staff, another 10-15 for their dispensary team. It just went on and on. So, you know, it was really clear to us when we were analysing this, which companies had really deeply thought about values. Now, this is only what companies publicly say. And as I said, there were kind of some just sentences that came up again and again didn't really tell us much. And I want to emphasize here there is a difference between espoused values and enacted values and aspirational values. And it was really hard from this piece of work to find out, are these their espoused value? Well, they are these espoused values, but are they aspirational? Are they things they're working towards? Or are they things that are already being worked out? How does that look? So this is why we wanted to use our interviews and our surveys to actually give a bit more insight. And I will say we did find evidence of all of these strategies in our interviews. But by far the most effective method, when we asked them, what does your company do to embed their values? What came up again and again was the role of leadership, and actually how the leaders have a real responsibility to not only communicate these values and to do that well, but also to be exemplars themselves. So I'm going to give you some quotes. Now, this is all hot off the press. We are, though our values survey has been published, these interviews and this survey are currently being written up. So you get to see this before a lot of people. So I hope that maybe excites you a little bit. So one here is talking about communication. And there was one company in particular who talked about how their senior leader, their CEO, was constantly reminding the rest of the team about their values. In every conversation they had around ideas, he was constantly referring back to the core values and how does this relate to the core values? And if we were going to live this out, what would that mean in this particular idea? And I love that the CEO himself referred to himself, he said his job was actually to be chief reminder. And I loved that phrase, absolutely loved that phrase. So there is this, you have to constantly communicate the values. And there were various different ways that this was talked about, as you can see in the third quote, of video messages and so on. But what I will say was really important about communicating the values was not just communicating them generally, but as it says here, what it means for that particular section of the company. And in our interviews as well, what came up was actually people really valued the opportunity to talk with their mentors, with their leaders, about what behaviours each value would look like in their specific work. So sometimes general plastering of values isn't particularly helpful for people working day to day. So they need the opportunity to actually figure out, okay, what does this mean for me in my role behaviourally, and how do I bring that value into action? So that was the first part of the role of leadership. And then the second part was the real importance of leaders living out these values themselves, being an exemplar of values. And when we asked participants what they valued in their leaders, or what leaders they looked up to, again and again, it was that they are the ones living out the values, that they actually genuinely believe in these values. And we had people saying, you know, it's easy to talk, but if I'm not walking it, if I'm not bringing that to life, that is a failure of leadership. And again and again came up, you can't just plaster them on a wall. You can't just throw them out there for one meeting, have a quick pit stop at the values, because it makes them feel disingenuous. You need to really think about, what does this mean in the culture, and constantly be authentic, live that out yourself. So if leaders have such an important part to be to bring people together around these values, if it really is up to the leaders, what does it mean to be a good leader? How do leaders do that in a way that is authentic? And I'm going to very briefly bring in some insights, shifting focus here a little bit from values more to good leadership and what it means. So I'll be bringing in some insights from our interviews and surveys. And again, coming from the lens of character is a way of putting values into action. So what is the character of a good leader? So with our leadership surveys, again, we were working with people in these sectors, and we were asking them to first list whatever features they could think of when thinking of a good leader specifically in their sector. So we did one for finance, one for law, one for tech. And then we asked a new group of participants within that sector to rate those features on how important they were. So you can see we had a lot of people. We did do this by sector, but we also had 84 features that were found across all of them. All of these sectors said these are important features for leadership. And across the different types of studies we did and the different sectors, there were 5 that were found in the top 10 most important features of leadership. And this is to have good communication skills, to lead with integrity, honesty, trustworthiness, and to be knowledgeable. And there were loads of different features, and we were able to kind of group these in 3 different ways. So there are your competency-based skills. So that is good leader needs to be risk aware. They need to be professional, they need to be knowledgeable, they need to be able to do the job. But they also need to be collaborative. They need to work with other people. They need to be able to communicate and be accountable. But also they have to be moral, they have to be good, they have to be striving for good, they have to have integrity and have honesty. And what was really evident across our surveys and across our interviews, that it's no good monopolizing on one single part of this. It's no good being someone who works really well with other people if you can't actually do the job that you need to do. It's no good being really good at the job if you can't communicate with people, or if you're just not trying to be good in the world. It's about a blend of all these 3. And this sense of balance came out from our interviews as well. And from our interviews, it was clear that leaders have so many different paradoxes, so many different conflicting demands that they have to constantly shuffle and figure out what to do with. And that starts within them. So the data I'm revealing here has very much been from the bottom up. So taking the data, analysing it bit by bit. And there was a real sense about the who of leadership. And there are 3 components here, which actually mapped really nicely onto our surveys. So there is the know-how, that employees really need to be able to trust that their leaders can do the job, that if they need help, they can ask them and they will know that they will have the right answer. But also that with a sense of humility, that they own their mistakes, that they share vulnerability, that they say, hey, I made a mistake here, that's my fault. Or recognizing that when your team succeeds, it's the team's successes, not just their success. And that coupled with being relational. Similarly, employers wanted leaders to give them ownership and to step back, but they also needed to have the security that the leaders would be there for support and advice. The conflict of having a leader for the team versus a leader for the company, And all of this can be talked about in terms of the mixture of the what and the how. And this is where we talk about something called practical wisdom, which is the ability to kind of sort through these conflicting demands and figure out what is the way to the best way to act in this situation to the right degree for the right audience. What is the thing? And not just focusing on one thing, I must be this, but actually, how do I hold all this together? So some takeaway points then. On the surface, UK corporate values very similar to US and global values. We're seeing some consistent themes, but we're also seeing some relatively new values, a more shift to perhaps other-oriented, a shift towards purpose and courage. There's a real emphasis that companies need to avoid values washing. And I know I don't need to tell you all here that they need real deep thought and to be enacted in a real genuine way. And that leaders have a responsibility within their organizations to both exemplify and communicate the values. And that good leaders require a sense of practical wisdom to balance these different types of virtues and skills, to balance and work through those paradoxes to navigate those competing demands. So I know that's been a lot, trying to cover a lot of research in a short amount of time, but hopefully it's not been too overwhelming. And I look forward to your questions if I can stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Becky. That's absolutely amazing. I think everyone had a lot of insights given to them, and hopefully quite a lot of food for thought. Let me just take you out of the spotlight and return to the full gallery. So questions from Becky. Thank you so much, Becky, again. I think I've got a few. I think Aaron has one that he's put in the chat. Anyone want to kick off though with a question straight up, or should we go to Aaron's? Aaron, do you want to just articulate your question? Your question about embedding values and how can it go wrong? Gaming the system, gaming all these incentives and everything else.
Thanks, Alan. It was great, and the reason I was able to ask that question was I did work in a corporate team, managing the knowledge internally across the clients and possibly integrated vendors. And I have my own opinion. It comes from as the experiences on the ground. And you did use a statement that practical wisdom is about ability to sort things to right degree, to right audiences. And is there a possibility that that's exactly what happens when they write audit reports, and that is where you're picking these things up and doing the survey? Because the leaders who are very, very clever, either from Oxford or from the street, some of them are very, that's the reason why they grow. So have they already sorted it out and written it there to the degree they want the investors to know or the public to know? And the problem is that when can like the incentivized financial incentives, if they are given, the public company has a report, is in the view, but they outsourcing some kind of activities to companies which are MSMEs, which can give a self-declaration and say that conduct some activities either at a low cost, and that low cost might include not following certain processes or not following certain hygiene. I'm not getting into detail. I have not able to, and this is what's happening is the deterioration of the agent-principal relationship across multiple times the value is getting created. So every time there is a gap, and that gap gets wider, where by the time it comes to public companies' annual report getting published. So
should we pause there and just give Becky a chance to answer that, because a few questions. They all really revolve, it seems to me, around the report and our report and accounts really reliable as a source of data on this.
Point taken. So when we see this from this research, if I identify that this particular embedded strategy is going, it might go wrong, how do we give that guidance to the leaders?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. And that's why I think it's so important to not just take the values survey and say, here are the embedding strategies, because when we had our interviews, so to take financial incentivization as an example, you know, we had one person telling us about how in a previous workplace they worked in, there were kind of very extravagant gifts that were given to people very publicly in front of everyone, and how they were given like this handbag worth like £1,000 or something ridiculous. And at first they were like, oh, lovely, I've been recognized. But the way that the rest of the office then treated them completely backfired. And so it is very much, as you say, kind of handling this overuse, underuse, and how do we find out what works well and what doesn't, and what's just a plaster statement. And so I think that's why anytime I present the value survey, I'm really keen to bring in those interview and say, this doesn't mean it works. Yes, and the other thing was just on the stakeholder alignment. So we did have some companies talk about how they only work with stakeholders where they feel there is an alignment with values. And, you know, in our interviews, we had some people saying that actually there are sometimes really difficult decisions that need to be made where it might make financial sense to partner with someone. But actually, if there's an underlying disagreement around a value, that you would hope, and in this case, they did choose not to partner with that person, take a bit of a loss on finances and go with someone else. So, yeah, that's what I can say on that.
Good. Anyone else got a question for Becky? We've got time for one more, I think. Alison, yeah.
Hi, Becky. That was great. Thank you. I sort of do leadership coaching, so I found that like I was like hooked on every slide. So the question I've always been asked is about return on investment and how you measure these values. Any tips? Got any thoughts on that? Because it's a really tricky one, whether it's a quantitative or qualitative. It's a difficult question, I know, but just any tips?
Yeah, that is a difficult question.
But it does come up because it's and yeah, it's all about how you demonstrate, and not just for one day. It's like every day of and even when people aren't looking, and you know, that sort of stuff. But
yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely. I think you're only going to get return of investment from the time it takes to come up with values and the way you do that. The only way you're going to get return of investment is if you are genuinely doing something about them. Otherwise, they do just become a plaster on the wall. I've lost my train of thought. There was something else I was going to say.
Oh, it was about, yeah, how do you measure that return on investment? Is there a way or multiple ways? Because it's
yeah, so I guess with that, I mean, there's internal employee surveys where you can just generally find out the health of your culture and how that relates to your values. Some people have tried to do research where they've looked at what values lead to more financial gain. I can't remember the results of that, but I can definitely look that up afterwards.
Yeah,
but I think it is because it's quite a hard thing to measure. It's quite intangible in many senses, that I think perhaps it's harder, but qualitative methods work a bit better for getting at a sense of that than quantitative. But you know, lots of companies use employee surveys and do frequently use surveys to say, what do you think about this value? How do you understand it? You know, do you think we should change it? And they do reiterate. And I think there are some companies out there who really do their values from the ground up. Some that create the values as a leadership team and then get input from different people or do focus groups. There's so many different ways that we looked at. It wasn't one of the main focuses in how values are chosen, but yeah, surveys is the main method we've seen for that.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. And I love that tone from the top. That's a great phrase, because that's where it should really stem from. Very difficult if you do it from bottom up.
If you try to do it from bottom up, right, it's like small plants trying to grow in big weeds, like they'll just get squished and end up conforming.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Becky. Thank you.
I guess it needs both, doesn't it? Bottom up and top down. Any more thoughts, questions for Becky before? You'll get another chance in our session at the end when we'll all be talking together and a chance to talk about other topics. Anything more now? I might just an observation. Oh yeah, Aishwarya.
This is the question for Becky. Actually, I have come across many people who have worked in corporate sector, especially when it comes to the leadership section, there is a way of blending the values is bit limited because they are more radiating the company's value and stuff, not very much, using the human side. That is like, now you said some new values are being added, like empathy and passion. Okay, maybe it's over the COVID and other stuffs that we are all facing, unstabilized world situations. Maybe it might have embedded in corporate sector, but is it really in real play that values really work to its core value or to its real implementation when it comes in the practical work?
It's a really great question, and of course my insight to this is very limited. I'm an academic, and the research I've done has only been with 21 different firms, many of whom you got to think about, the ones we've done the interviews and surveys with know that we're the Oxford Character Project, right? So they are going to be at least to some degree open about that. Or on the flip side, we have one company going, we don't think we're very good at this, please tell us. But for the most part, it's people who are open to it. And so it is really hard to say. I mean, in a lot of our companies, so our focus had been around character and culture. That was always the main focus of the interviews. We had maybe one question on values, and we were.
So have you seen that those stuffs like reflecting in their answers when you have been interviewing them? Anything that sort that they have some sort of real implementation of values have been not that much sensed by the employees?
Yeah, no, so we were actually pleasantly surprised by what we heard in terms of examples, like where they're facing different moral dilemmas, and we asked them, how do you navigate that, and the role of values within that, actually thinking about, well, if I've got this decision to make and I'm not sure, then I will think about a value and how that applies. I think with all these things, the leadership perhaps were more vocal about it, and there were some instances where people lower down were perhaps a bit more skeptical. I think that's going to be natural. I mean, some of these corporations are huge, and that's probably another thing, is it's easier, I would say, in smaller companies to get a really genuine culture that does permeate around all of it than really big companies. So yeah, just have to bear in mind.
Okay. Good. I think we'll
thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishwarya. And thank you again, Becky. That was really fascinating. There's so much to get our teeth into, and no, well done indeed. And we'll have another chance to ask some questions in the general conversation a bit later. But in the meantime, let's hand over to Jamie Davis. Let me just introduce him quickly. He is he's an on-purpose associate on the on-purpose associate program, which some of you will know about. It's a leadership program that develops people to drive change through their careers. So we're on to leadership again. We've had different viewpoints of values bringing us together, but this is from the point of view, quite a different point of view. He's currently at a work placement in the UK Department for Culture, Media and Sport in their Tackling Loneliness team, helping drive a national conversation on loneliness and influence policymaking and delivery by organisations across the country, across the UK. He has worked in other placements in the social investment consultancy, various equity and inclusion projects, and prior to On Purpose, he worked in fundraising and has volunteered for various charities. So he's had a very diverse experience, which is very relevant to our theme today of values bring us together. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you, Charles, for the warm introduction. And Heidi and Becky, I really enjoyed your presentations. A lot of what you said really resonated and chimed with me, particularly Heidi, your poem, and yeah, what does together look and feel like? And Becky, your buzzwords certainly ran true. I certainly thought, oh God, do I have any of these buzzwords for me? Although I'm not an organisation, but yeah. Right, I'll just pull up my slides.
Have you got your slides yourself, Jamie, or do you want me to play them here? Up to you.
If you'd be happy to play them.
Up to you. I'll share them if you like.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, either way is fine. Let me just quickly fast forward through them though to get to yours. Here we are.
Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, just to give a brief overview of what I'll be talking about with you guys, I'm just going to briefly share a bit about my journey as someone who tries to work in alignment with their values and have a social impact in their career. So my journey of where I got to where I am today, a bit about the On Purpose leadership program that I'm on and its values and how this plays out in terms of trying to create a systemic change. And yeah, I'll share a little bit about the impact that the organisation has too. So it should build on really nicely in terms of what Heidi and Becky have talked about.
Yeah, just bear with me a second, Jamie. The thing jumped back as you saw.
That's okay.
Charles, that is values taking life.
That is values. The values. I'm not quite sure what the values are there, Aaron. Anyway, here we are, Jamie. Is this okay to page to start?
That's perfect. Thank you. So yeah, just to give a bit of the landscape of where I'm coming from, I've been working for charities for 4 years. I started doing with a lot of internships and volunteering. So I volunteered for Childline to get experience of frontline delivery, and through different internships, I experienced kind of a bit more about charity fundraising. One of the charities I worked for wanted me to come back in a new business role. This was great in terms of getting exposure to pitching to companies and thinking about how to position your service delivery and effective communication. And I had a really good manager. She made me believe that I was more than what I was, and I kind of punched above my weight. I was given lots of opportunities, and I felt like I could really be my authentic self in the workplace. There was psychological safety. The downside of my first role was the leadership team was very unambitious. And during COVID, instead of trying to pivot and grow the service to reach more beneficiaries, it kind of shrunk and quite literally tried to reduce its service delivery to support fewer families. And that really contrasted internally for me in terms of what I wanted to achieve, in terms of how I saw my place in terms of having an impact for the families that the charity was supporting. And there was just a misalignment of values between the leadership team and myself and some of our colleagues. So I then moved on to my next role, which was at a larger children's charity, and I worked in corporate partnerships. So this again was about building really good relationships, understanding culture. I got the opportunity to run campaigns. This little image is of, if any of you have been to Flight Club, it's like a darts social activity you can do, and one of the partnerships that I was responsible for, when they heard I was leaving, wanted to take me out and just celebrate the relationship that we built, which was wonderful. But I ended up leaving because, again, there was a misalignment of values between myself and the leadership team. There was a lack of care in personal development of staff. I saw examples where we weren't trying to do the best that we could for the people that we were supporting. And that was really disheartening to think we're not really striving to deliver the best quality that we can. We're not trying to raise as much money as we can for the people we're supporting. We're not trying to build as strong relationships and strategic partnerships. We're not trying to really do all that we can to support the people we're here for. So I then moved internally to my next role, which was in philanthropy, which was good to experience more bespoke relationship building and working with high net worth individuals. This is a photo of me at an event where it was a clay shooting pigeon event. I'd never been to one before, but it was really pretty. And I ended up moving on from that after 9 months or so because there was a big conflict in management style between my manager and my way of working. I'm quite people focused and they were very outcomes focused. But in the department I was in, there was quite a lot of gaslighting and just a misalignment of values. It was a very insincere environment, and even the model of relationship we're being encouraged to have with the high net worth individuals wasn't about creating genuine trust between the charity and the philanthropists and creating opportunities for them to have the impact in the world that they wanted. It was actually about trying to sort of squeeze money out of them and trying to hit budget targets, and it just felt really inauthentic. So after kind of 4 years in the charity sector, I felt pretty disillusioned, and knowing that with hindsight, I hadn't thought of it in this way, but I think the values I'd set out when going into the charity sector, the picture of me on the left, was care. I do care about the people that I'm trying to serve, and I wanted to deliver real quality, to have as much impact as I could. I wanted to act with integrity and also creativity. I think rules can be broken if it's for the greater good, rather than just doing the same old same thing. And I also have a sense of justice and fairness, and across my 4 years, this was kind of missing. So Charles, if we could go to the next slide, that's what takes me to joining the On Purpose program. Now there should be a video. If the video doesn't work, I've got a link to it, and I'll pop it in the chat because I think it's quite good.
I think we just have to stop sharing this to get to the video. Experience has taught me. So I should be able to get it up. Let's see, there we are. With luck, that will. Okay, this will be it. Okay, let me just enlarge the screen and start it. If the sound is dicky, I'll have to restart it.
Sounds good.
Can people hear okay? Is the sound okay, Jamie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic, thank you, Charles. Let's jump off of that and then go back into the slides.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, just to share that the sound was just a bit of background music.
It livened everyone up. I think it woke everyone up. I'm sure.
So hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour as to what program I'm on, what On Purpose is about. It's a social enterprise which helps people at a crossroads in their career, but who know that they want to have an impact in their lives, find a way to move forward in their career so that they have the impact that they want. You are on a 12-month paid contract, and you do 2 6-month work placements in that. So on the right are some examples of the organizations that my cohort are at, which ranges from the public sector, the government, NHS, charities, through to private sector companies such as eBay and consultancy firms. And the idea is you go into a purpose-driven organization, an organization which is trying to have some kind of social impact and create social justice. And every week, not only are you learning what it's like to work in these environments, but you're also learning each week at training sessions with On Purpose. So every Friday, I'm either learning about impact or I'm learning about leadership. So some examples of some of the modules we have are financing impact, from crowdfunding through to social impact bonds, measuring and managing impact, from how to define impact through approaches to quantifying and qualifying it and communicating impact, scaling impact, approaches to scaling case studies from replication through to open source approaches, and then also leadership. Currently in this part, we're learning about leadership of the self, reflection on how you lead and how your contribution to a team, how you contribute to a team through your values, leadership of a healthy and happy organization, from organizational design and culture through to practical approaches such as agile and lean, and how you lead systemic change, an introduction to systems change from theory through to practice. And alongside that, we have a mentor, a coach, and a buddy. So your learning is reiterate it both in the placements where you can apply the learning tools that you're developing through the program, but also it's reintegrated into your brain, into your learning and memory through mentors and coaches. If we could click to the next slide. Charles, if we could, perfect, thank you. So a little bit about On Purpose's values. Choose optimism. We believe in a better future and that everyone has a part to play in making it happen. Learn together. Magic happens when we welcome diversity and learn together. Step up. We take action in the interest of the whole. Engage our head and our hearts. We are proud to be strong problem solvers. We are more proud to be a caring community, and act with integrity. We walk our talk and live up to our responsibilities. I've got a little bit of spiel, which I'm just going to read my phone here, because I think it will just help. At On Purpose, we believe the economic system we've created is not working for anybody. We're using resources in an unsustainable way, threatening our planet, and we're also treating people poorly at the expense of others, meaning that many people can't live a fulfilled, happy life. The current crisis we're in has shown just how fragile our economic system really is. And crucially, we believe that the way our economy works is something that we can challenge and change. And it's a social construct that can be redesigned to benefit people and the planet. On Purpose exists because we believe it's only by developing leaders who will create new types of organizations and transform old ones that will be able to create change. And that's why through the associate program that On Purpose offers and the wider work it does, On Purpose offers an opportunity for both organizations and individuals to experiment, challenge, and debate new ways of leading and working. Essentially, it's creating a community of people who have a desire to do things differently, and the community is spread across the world, working to create a more positive future in a wide range of areas, from reforestation as a means of mitigating climate change, through to redesigning education systems to serve children better. If we could go to the next slide, Charles, that'd be great. I'm not an expert in this stuff. I'll just field that, but just to try and give a bit more of the big picture, which On Purpose is trying to achieve, I think these definitions are really helpful. And it starts kind of with the idea that the significant problems we have cannot be solved at the same level of thinking with which we created them. What we need is a paradigm shift, which in other words is a transformation that it's a shift in how a group of people understand the world, and it's a change in beliefs, values, and assumptions they hold, often unconsciously. We need a paradigm shift of how we all think to think in terms of systems. Systems thinking is a different paradigm to how we think about the world, instead of understanding the world analytically, so through separating things into individual, even smaller parts. Systems thinking focuses on the connectors between parts in an attempt to understand the whole. System thinking enables us to work in complexity. So if we start thinking in terms of systems and bigger picture thinking, this enables us to change systems. Systems change is a way to make change happen more effectively by making changes to the structure of a system, so the connectors between parts, instead of focusing on the individual parts themselves and improving those. As an example, a transformation of a paradigm shift, a transformational paradigm shift is a type of systems change where not only the structure, but also the underlying beliefs, values, and assumptions change too. So what's meant by that is even how we think about problems, how we think about the world, from being small scale to large scale, think about systems, that in itself is a systems change, which I think is quite neat. And if we start thinking about changing systems, we can create healthier systems. A healthy system is a description of how current enduring systems behave, derived from understanding and observing all kinds of different systems, which modern systems thinking has made possible. It provides for us a goal for the transformation we want to help bring about. If we go on to the next slide, Charles, that'd be great. So what does this shift from thinking in terms of, well, moving away from old thinking in terms of a new, more transformational way of thinking, what does that mean for organizations? To make a transformation at an organization, at an organizational level, you need to address people, paradigm, person, practices. So people, how do we relate to people? Do we want to try and do organizations work in a controlling way, or in a way which is more relational and working with people? We need to think about in terms of the paradigm, in terms of how we operate. Are we trying to win alone, or are we trying to succeed together with other people in the same ecosystems we're in? Purpose, why are we doing what we do? Are we working for profit, or are we working to contribute to the health of the system in which we're in? And what are we doing in practice? How do we do what we do? Do we exploit? Do we maximize profit? Do we try and accumulate wealth? Or are organizations working in a regenerative way? Are they self-regulatory? Are they part of the circular economy? And what we can do is we can think about how we operate as an organization or as individuals in terms of the wider society, being a part of one of three horizons. So this is the three horizons model, where horizon one is you're part of the old guard. You're an organization or an individual where your practices and the way you go about things is a bit concerning, and it's business as usual. And you will make small piecemeal changes to how you operate, but that's only in order to maintain your power. You then have horizon two, which is organizations which are more innovative, but the innovations either actually help facilitate the old guard still maintaining its power and still maintaining the status quo, or your organizations are helping facilitate, bring about a new era, a new horizon, and that's horizon three. These are organizations which are future aligned in their practices. And actually, in the long term, they are the long-term successor for the old guard, for the status quo in Horizon 1. These are organizations which, in the early stages of their development, they are very much on the fringes and they are the minority. But over time, once there's been a tipping point and people are more endorsing and supportive of these organizations, that's when they can really fully flourish and deliver what they want. Just to read a little bit that I've written down. What we can do with this model is we can put ourselves in the picture, and we can choose which patterns we want to maintain and which we want to try and shift. And this third horizon in the present is a pattern of activity pursued by people living their values, by doing something that they believe in. And we can stand for and embody a new pattern in the present and align with the patterns emerging around us. We can also convene the future. We can become adept at managing the conversation between the voices of these three horizons. And there are typical ways in which each position hears the other voices from the other horizons, both as positive and negative. And what convening the future effectively means is becoming aware of all of these perspectives and working with them to shift the conversation in a generative direction. So that kind of gives an overview of what On Purpose is about and what it's trying to achieve and the big picture goal. And I thought, just to end, if we could go to the next slide, I'd speak a little bit about the impact that On Purpose has had. So there have been over 400 associates go through the program. It's delivered over 2,000 days of training, mentoring, and coaching. From the placements that these people are put in, we've delivered over £10 million of value. 95% of people who go through the program feel confident in leading social change, and 96% of the people who go through the program feel proud of the work that they are now doing. There's a picture on the right of a guy called Kush, and he did the program 10 years before me. So he graduated in 2012. And just to give a small example of systems change, which can happen by individuals and organizations. When he was a trustee for a local hospital, they tried introducing parking tickets for disabled people using the hospital. And Kush is a part of the disabilities community himself. He fought tooth and nail with the hospital to not introduce this, and they still did. So he said, okay, if you're going to do this, I'm going to make it law that you actually can't do it. And he lobbied the NHS, he got cross-party parliamentary support, and after a number of years across the UK, you're actually now not allowed to have parking tickets for disabled people using hospitals. And what this has done is it's saved 80 to 100 million pounds worth of disposable income for the disabilities community. In the bottom left is a picture of me and my cohort currently on the program. And if I, in the next 10 years or so, can achieve anything close to the impact that Kush has had, I'd be really, really proud. And yeah, I wanted to leave you guys with this quote, which I find quite inspiring when we're trying to be a part of this Horizon 3, and we're trying to all act with integrity and in alignment with our values. The person who embraces a new paradigm at an early stage must often do so in defiance of the evidence provided by problem solving. They must, that is, have faith that the new paradigm will succeed with the many large problems that confront it, knowing only that the older paradigm has failed with few. A decision of that kind can only be made on faith. And I hope that at the end of my talk, and having heard from everyone else today, that we'll all hopefully come away with the faith and the confidence to continue acting in alignment with our values. Thank you.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you so much. Well done, Jamie. That was really interesting. Very good. And very interesting to find out about what On Purpose does, which I didn't know at all, although I know my colleague Neil has a good relationship with them. What we'll do is I'll unpin this and we'll just see whether we've got any questions coming for you. Let me just unspotlight you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm
you want to be unspotlighted? Yeah, okay.
It's funny. Oh no, take me off spotlight. It's just funny seeing just your face.
Okay. So any thoughts, any comments, any questions, anyone? We've got a few minutes to do that, although we're running a tiny bit over. Alan, yeah.
Jamie, brilliant, just brilliant, inspiring. So thank you so much. And my question is about generations, actually, because I find myself thinking that people in your generation are much better for the future than my generation. And how do you overcome the obstacles of older generations that might not be quite as enlightened?
Great question. Thank you, Alan. I think there's a recognition of the experiences and times that previous generations have lived in. So the younger generations we're coming through now, certainly in the West, now have the headspace to be able to really problem solve these big picture things. Previous generations were dealing with war, they were dealing with post-trauma, after wars. So I think there's a real understanding that's needed for where other generations are coming from and to try and empathize with them. In terms of how to influence people coming from a different time and place to younger generations, I think that then comes down to communication skills. And I'm sure communication will be something which comes up again and again, and it's something which actually came up quite a bit in Becky's slides. But I think there's a real piece at the moment around, even though younger generations are perhaps more aware of the systems and the environment that they are in and their wider society and their fit within that. In the news, in politics, we're seeing a real polarization of communities and people, and the language we use is incredibly isolating and damaging. So my approach would be to really empathize with other generations and different communities, try and create a sense of us and we rather than you versus me, try and find a shared identity or a shared common goal rather than create, oh, you need to change, you're going to lose and I'm going to win this argument, but actually, what's our common goal here? There's a few more things around that, but I'll probably save that for the Q&A because I don't want to lose all my little bits and pieces.
Okay, good. Thanks, Jamie. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on? Okay, let's as Jamie said, we can return to some of the points raised by Jamie later on. We've got three more things left to do. First of all, though, we're going to take have a 15 minutes where Alan Williams is going to run a poll, which I hope you'll all participate in. But it's also an opportunity. I put it carefully in that order. Also an opportunity for you to take, if you need to or want to take a quick break for whatever purposes, cup of coffee, wash your hands, whatever it is. So we'll do that now. We'll restart at, for those in the UK or on the same hourly time zone, at 5 past the hour. For those in India, at 35 past the hour. So in other words, in 10 minutes, just over 10 minutes, if that's okay. Is that okay with you, Alan?
Yeah, that's fine. So the way this is going to work is there's a link there. If you could please complete this survey. It's just the 3 values that you think are most in play to bring us together.
That's on the chat, right?
That's on the chat, yeah. So you just click on the link and make the vote. And then also, could you put the 3 values that you've voted for on that survey in the chat here so that everybody can see it, and so we can have a discussion around what that's telling us and what's coming through. And in the meantime, like Charles says, if you need to step away for a few minutes to make a coffee or whatever, then do that. It's going to be a pretty informal 10 minutes or so.
And after that, we're going to hear from Janet Thorne, and then after that, we're going to have hopefully we've got time left, 20 or 30 minutes left at the end of that, having a general discussion involving all the speakers and everyone else, just discussing what we've made of what we've heard so far. But first, the survey. So if you'd like to put your thoughts into Menti, make your choices. Alan, we can choose our own values, can't we? Or do we have
it's totally free choice. So there's no restricted list to choose from. You just need to think to yourself, if I only had to choose 3 values that were important for bringing us together, which 3 do I think play the most important role? And then enter them.
And then we enter them. Sorry, I'm talking myself through this. We enter them in the chat, if you would, so we just have a look and see what we're all voting for. If you don't want to keep, if you want to keep them to yourselves, that's obviously fine.
And please feel free to start the conversation. So if anybody's got any thoughts or comments or observations on the values that are starting to be seen on the chat, then let's have a chat.
And you're going to, in a short while, when everyone's had a chance to input into the Menti poll, you're going to give us some revelations.
Yeah, before we return to the main meeting, I'll just show you where the results stand at the moment, just so that you can see what people are saying in response to this survey. We're running it right the way through until the end of October, wanting to get as many responses as possible. So please feel free to copy this link and send it to everybody you know and ask them to complete it.
Okay, and you've been running it, you started running it when?
About 6 weeks ago, something like that.
Early May, something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Any thoughts on what's coming through so far?
I think do you think the deck has been a little stacked in that we've been talking, there's quite a lot of values we've been talking about already. I mean, that's fair enough in a way, isn't it? We've been talking about a lot of these values already, haven't we? in the talks we've had and the discussion we've had already. It was interesting to me. One just is a comment that carries over from what we're hearing from Becky, that the values, organizational values, had started including words like humility, courage, passion, and empathy, which are typically personal values, aren't they, rather than organizational values. And that I see some of those coming up in, well, these are obviously all personal values, but I just wonder whether there's a sort of convergence that's slowly happening between organizational and personal values, but maybe that's a bit off the subject.
Actually, integrity. So Sally, you just included integrity, and when we were listening to Becky's talk, I noticed that integrity came up a lot in the research. And there's a guy, I can't remember his name now, but he says that integrity is the fabric of every value rather than being a value in itself. And so I was just curious, Becky, to hear your perspective on that. If you're still there, you might have stepped away, or anybody else's. You know, is integrity a value in itself, or is integrity, you know, when we are really true to what we say we stand for?
Alan, as you picked on me.
Don't take it like that.
No, not at all, not at all. I think our values change, I think, to where we are. So I choose integrity just because of the place I'm at the moment, where that's not being purposely shown. So in order to turn that into an action, I feel that I need to be promoting that, so that people are acting with integrity at this moment in time within my scope and area of where I'm currently working, which is really important to me. So I've left jobs because of that my integrity has been challenged or imbalanced, and so that I don't and I would say, if you asked me probably 6 months ago, that wouldn't have been on one. I would have equally said what you were saying, but at this moment in time it needs to be almost up front because of the journey that I am going through with my own organisation. So I think that's the reason why I put that there, but I also accept the challenge in terms of that as a whole.
Thank you.
As you say, Alan, it's interesting as an overarching one. I'm just sort of pondering that, because I do feel a resonance with that as an overarching. Are you demonstrating all your values with integrity? Quite a powerful message, really. One to ponder, I think. Yeah.
And what are the common ones that are coming up then? Collaboration and compassion seem to be two that are very common across the lists that I'm looking through.
I put shared understanding. I know you can't put 2 words, but I felt it was quite important to have the shared understanding. A lot of work that I do with, certainly when I've got my project management hat on, a shared document is not shared understanding. And so trying to communicate shared understanding, it can be a tough one too. So yes, it's 2 words, but still there's that understanding, but it's that shared understanding which I think is really important.
And maybe if you collaborate with compassion, you can arrive at shared understanding.
Yeah.
And creativity and visionary, which I take to be a little bit to do with creativity as well, has come up several times, hasn't it? Which is interesting.
Vision's quite interesting with leaders. I've seen that quite a lot. Communicating your vision with another value added next to it, but communicating your vision with clarity and with integrity. I've seen that a lot on leadership articles.
Yeah.
Which I think links to what Becky was saying earlier in terms of the top down and being clear in your messaging across the board.
I mean, for me, this list, it's quite interesting how much commonality there is in the list. Just our small number of people, the words who come up with this. There's quite a strong commonality of all the, when we compile lists of values, they generally stretch to, 80, 100, we can come up with any number of words that represent values. But we seem to return to the same ones or very sort of synonymous ones time and time again. Maybe not surprisingly.
I think it's interesting if there's a move towards a value or away from a value as well. I think that's that's a different topic altogether, but that's an interesting slant on values.
Like we're seeing maybe in with the organizational world, a move away from the classic organizational values to including values which sound more like personal values. I think could be very interesting. Aaron, yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah, this particular move towards and move away, Alan and I were writing a paper, and we explored into the conflicts, especially conflicts an entrepreneur would have. And because the decisions have to be taken, and how much of abstraction or how much of appropriation and stuff. So even in person and also from in corporates, as you said, I've seen moving towards and moving away. So it's kind of a wave sometimes. But how? What is your kind of deviation? Do you how often do you closely stick to it, and how often do you kind of let go? Is the letting go, or is the slight losing because of factors like survival? Does basic human instinct come into play, where you say that, okay, this is not time for humanistic values, but it's time for pure instinct-based reflective action. So I think, yeah, I believe that people do move and companies do move.
Thanks, Aaron. Alan, are you ready to give us the state of play in your?
Yeah, sure. If you could make me a co-host, so I can.
Are you not? Okay. I will indeed. There you go.
Thank you. Just got to find it on my desktop now.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, I'm not sure if people have come back by now. Sometimes hard to tell. But we'll give them a moment or two. You go ahead, and I'm just saying we're almost ready to start up as soon as you've done that, I think.
Okay. So that's how it looks at the moment. So not dissimilar to what we're saying. So compassion coming through strongly, empathy is strongly represented on our group as well. Collaboration, maybe not so much on this one. Integrity is there, quite strong, as is trust and respect. So as expected, I guess, some overlap, but I think the point that you made earlier, Charles, is that when you've got a free choice, we tend to see lots more different values, whereas in an exercise like ours, you can be influenced by what somebody has just typed into the chat, whereas with your entry in here, you're not influenced in that same way. So that's where we're at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. It's interesting, actually, isn't it, that we I don't think any of us put in our chat, any of us put respect, for instance, which I didn't either. And maybe it's because no one spoke about respect over the last hours. Somebody did. Okay. Oh, you did, Aaron. Okay.
No, I spotted. I did
as well.
Yeah.
Which is okay. Which is a big one. But, okay. Yeah. Let's move on. I think everyone is either back or hopefully will be in a moment. So I'd like to resume our I would say the main purpose of our meeting, as though that was a sort of sideline. But we're back to the speakers, and next up is. I'm very pleased to say we have with us Janet Thorne, who, as many of you will know, is the CEO of Reach Volunteering. For those of you who aren't in the UK, and there's some of you here, it's a very well-known national charity, which is, I think, the leader in volunteering or connecting people who want to volunteer, who are willing to donate their expertise with charities that need that expertise. I have personal experience of it and have used it in relation to charities I'm involved with a number of times. Janet's been CEO there for over 10 years. She's worked across public, private and voluntary sectors in all sorts of roles, from finance director to youth and community worker. And she was a leading figure in the recent Change the Story campaign with various other friends of ours, which I think she's going to talk a little bit about in a moment. So, Janet, over to you.
Thanks, Charles. And before I get going, I just wanted to say how brilliant it was to hear On Purpose's ambition about redesigning the economy and the whole sort of systems approach. I found that very inspiring. So thank you for that. Right, so I've got a slide deck, which I assume I've got sharing permission to.
Wait a minute, because
or do I?
You know, let me just quickly do that, because I don't think you do. You've got it.
Great. So presumably that will.
Yeah, it's looking good.
Looking good. All right, brilliant. Yeah, so from Reach Volunteering, like Charles said, and basically the main thing we do is connect up people who want to volunteer their professional expertise with charity, or not just charities, actually social purpose organizations that need those skills. And we work nationally across the UK and across every profession. And the main thing we do is like a online matching platform, self-service matching platform, if you like. We also do some sort of guidance and stuff like that as well, and some campaigns, which I'll be talking about in a minute. But the main thing we do is literally connect up organizations that are looking for skills with people who want to donate those skills. So we're bringing them together. And to give you a sense of the scale, I mean, we're a small team, but last year groups recruited over 1,000 trustees and over 2,000 volunteers through our service for quite substantial roles. And obviously the numbers who are kind of on the platform being active is higher than that, because not everything results in a match. So what we've seen is a big surge in volunteering in the last 3 years. So I really wanted to make this slide just show you 2019, first of all, because otherwise it kind of, the growth gets lost, as it were, because 2019 was our record, right, when we were there. And that was just about 5,000 people signing up to volunteer in that year. And previously it was kind of modest growth. Well, it felt quite a big growth, actually, at that point. But with hindsight, was modest growth compared to what happened in 2020, which was, of course, the pandemic. And then that level of interest has basically been there for the last 3 years, amazingly, and is carrying on now. And it's worth, well, it's interesting to note that this is in sort of stark contrast with what's happening in the rest of the sector. Just last Friday was the latest quarterly barometer produced by Pro Bono Economics and some others, which is, whilst sort of reflecting that there are some positive signs for the sector in terms of staff recruitment and all sorts of other things. The sector's been really going through a tough time, but volunteering remains a really big concern. I think it was 6 out of 10 organizations are citing it as a major worry, volunteer recruitment. And there's a kind of wider, there's a number of different, I'm quoting that one, but there's a community life survey. There's just a lot of different research coming out saying that volunteering is at an all-time low and is never recovered from the pandemic. Whereas we are finding that we've got 3 times pre-pandemic levels. I've got to be honest, I don't really know the full reasons why it's different. I think there are some things that are distinct about the kind of volunteering we offer. And obviously a lot of this is kind of the wider sector information is on aggregate. So there's probably different trends going on within that, and it's just averaging them out. For Reach, a lot of the roles can be done remotely or virtually, which means there can be, there's fewer barriers, there's no travel expenses, you can fit it around your life. Some of the commitment issues, in terms of fitting it with other commitments are not there. I think the other thing is, for example, one of the main sources of trustees for us is all of our roles are streamed through LinkedIn and served up to LinkedIn members who aren't necessarily looking for volunteer roles, right? Probably most of them aren't. But it serves up roles which are relevant to an individual's skill set. So we reach out to a sort of passive audience. And I think we definitely know from quite a lot of the research that's been done, there's a lot of burnout amongst the existing volunteers who've maybe been through the pandemic, absolutely knackered. And so reaching out to new audiences is definitely helping us. And I think we tend to get a younger cohort as well than some of the more traditional volunteering. And I think there's some evidence that there's issues of ill health amongst those older groups or more caring responsibilities, which is perhaps making it more difficult for them to volunteer. So there's a lot of things going on like that. But for the purposes of today, I think there's something else. There's some other hypotheses I'd like to put forward, I guess. So this is a chart which shows number of volunteers signing up every month since January 2018. And I just want to, this is people signing up to volunteer through Reach. That also, the number of people applying for roles follows a very, very similar trajectory. So it's not people just signing up and then not doing anything. It's not just intention, it's people actively trying to do something. But I didn't want to shower you with similar looking graphs. So kind of take it as read that this is similar to activity. And I think the one thing I want to point out here, as you can see, it's really, so 2018 and 2019, you can see there is a kind of modest growth upwards. You'll see that there's every January has got a little grey line, right? And that is a big spike. So I kind of want you to notice that first of all, because one of the things we're not doing anything different at January. This is not new campaigns by us. This is just people responding through our existing channels, but in greater numbers in January. That's clearly a new year, new you type activity going on. It maps what happens with gyms and all sorts of things. So the wider social context is really important in terms of who's signing up to volunteer at Reach. That's an established pattern with us. And it drops every December, which is totally unsurprising. But these big surges, which are just huge, they're like mountain ranges, they dwarf the changes that happened pre-2019. The first one is the pandemic surge, and I know we saw mutual aid groups springing up everywhere. The second one is what I've called the cost of living surge, because it started in October, just as the cost of living was beginning to bite. We were really worried we were going to see a big fall in volunteer numbers, because we were like, people aren't going to be able to afford to volunteer, they'll need to prioritize getting work. In fact, as what happened was it just started taking off. And in fact, like in January, we had the highest ever number of volunteers. And that's continued right through until, well, certainly May's figures, those numbers were, I think they jumped up very slightly. They're still really, really high. So my hypothesis is this is people, much like in the pandemic, people signed up because they were worried about others. I think people are signing up because of the cost of living. I cannot see, that's the best guess I've got. I'd love to get some, if anyone has a research grant and wants to come along and work with us on it, I'd love to find out what the motivations are, or put some evidence behind that, explore that hypothesis. But that's my best guess. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was our values campaign. So basically, we worked in collaboration with Common Cause Foundation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Common Cause Foundation, but they work in, they've done a lot of work on values. There's an awful lot of stuff they've done, and I can't possibly do justice to it now, but one of the things is about thinking about intrinsic values. So those values which are on the values map, which are kind of grouped together across a large, broad part of it, which are all about values which are in and of themselves intrinsically rewarding, as opposed to extrinsic values, which are ones where the reward is external: wealth, status, power, money, that sort of stuff. And the intrinsic ones are about care. A lot of the values that have just been listed, actually: care, empathy, belonging, curiosity, creativity, those sorts of things. And some of the findings that are particularly significant for the campaign, one is about, if you prime, as in, the jargon is horrible, but if you kind of put that value front of mind, call it out explicitly, then people are much more likely to act on it. It sort of strengthens it and makes people more, yes, it makes it more available to people, as it were, and they're more likely to act on it. But the second thing, which we found really drew us, really drew our attention, was the values perception gap. So that is to say that if you survey people across countries and across multiple times, you'll find that most people, about 3/4 of people, will hold the top values will mostly be intrinsic values, right? And that happens consistently. Those are the values that are most important to them. However, most people assume that their fellow citizens are motivated by extrinsic values. There's a really big gap between what we think, what we care about, and what we think other people care about, and what the reality is. And that really matters, because if you think that you really care about, I don't know, care for others, but you think that other people are just selfish, you're much less likely to engage, take action. You're much more likely to feel alienated, alone. You know, has a really significant effect. And there's been really interesting studies done on that among school children, for example, saying, well, I'm never going to speak up about this stuff, I'll hide it. I think it's just me who feels like this, you know, and then of course that silence in itself becomes self-perpetuating. It perpetuates that belief that other people don't care because no one's talking about it. So that's the context. And we particularly wanted to do this for two reasons. One is the evidence is that if you prime people's intrinsic values in terms of volunteering, because volunteering, of course, is a brilliant example of people enacting those intrinsic values. But if you draw on those, then people are much more likely to volunteer for a longer time. The volunteering is more durable. And they're more likely to do other kinds of volunteering or other kinds of pro-social activity, like donate money, or not necessarily just to you, but to others as well. So it kind of raises the tide for everybody, right? So that's the first reason we wanted to do it. And the second was, you know, ultimately our vision is about a thriving, fair and sustainable society. For that, we need a different kind of culture, much to the sort of systemic paradigm shift that, totally forgotten your name, but the person from On Purpose was just talking about. Thank you. And to do that, we need to build a culture which celebrates intrinsic values rather than we're all subjected thousands of times a day to consumerist messages which prime our extrinsic values. So this is kind of our way of what, you know, it's really important to basically build a wider culture and challenge the deeper narrative about what it is to be human. A little bit of context about this. We did a workshop with Common Cause Foundation in November, and then all the team got really excited, and they were like, this is brilliant, we're going to do something about it, we're going to do a big campaign. And we were like, okay, we're going to do it in January because of that spike. So, and we've got a marketing person who works 3 days a week and had lots of other commitments. So we did this really quickly. We've got no background in campaigns either. We did it with a lot of enthusiasm and excitement, not much expertise and no budget. So, but we wanted to see, we wanted to see how we could make it work. And it's really been a brilliant experience. It's been really powerful. So I'm going to ask Charles now to play. We made a little video, and I'm going to ask Charles to play the video, which is very short. I hope you can make the sound work because the music is very stirring.
Okay, if you could stop, that's brilliant. I'll try and hit upon the right one. This is that right? Join our community. No.
No.
No, wait a minute. That's not. It's. Oh, it's YouTube. I need to just move on.
wonder if I can...
No, it's not allowing me to do that. Sorry, let's stop share. It's disappeared.
I could quickly...
you know how it is.
I tell you what, shall I talk through the campaign where you look for it, Charles?
Wait a minute. No, I just hang on. I just yeah, I can't. If you want to talk through, and I'll get it. I can't get it while I'm on the
sure.
Yeah, let me just do that.
Actually, bear with me. I need to share the forgetting how to, right, I need to open up that. I wanted to just, basically the campaign, we got volunteers to share the values that motivate them to volunteer. And we got other volunteer, it wasn't just Reach volunteers, we got other volunteer involving organizations to participate. We had about 14, 15 who joined in, it was brilliant. And so here are some of the comments that some of the quotes that volunteers shared with us about why they volunteered. So, for example, Samuel from who came to us via Inspiring Scotland. Positive change happens when we take individual responsibility for pursuing a goal or supporting a cause greater than ourselves. As a volunteer, I'm able to use my creativity, influence, and means to challenge the status quo, highlight the stories of grassroots organizations, and support underfunded and disenfranchised. There's no greater gift than being able to contribute to the greater good and to create change that leaves the world a little better than before I was here. And this was from, I can't remember the charity now, but they had some lovely ones. A sense of kinship with other people and a real excitement and sense of adventure when we explore poetry together. And then there were some nice ones from via Global Action Plan. They're a little bit long, so I won't read them, but what I will do is share this. I can share this way with people if they're interested in seeing some of the quotes that people came up with.
Can I have another attempt in a minute when you're ready to?
Okay, well, I think I'm ready.
Okay, that's good. There we are. And as people have been reminded me, thank you very much, share the sound and optimize for video. All done, here we are. Has everyone got it? Managers, is it okay?
Yeah, it's great. Thanks, Charles. As you can see, we were quite quite ambitious, all about changing the entire world and the story of what it is to be human. Wrote a blog as well, kind of, which was much longer, explaining some of the research and sharing why we were keen to do this work. And people were really positive. People are so glad to hear something positive, right? There's so much negative stuff going on. So it's a nice thing to do. People are really grateful for it. I think I'll screen share. I think I think I've got a couple of slides left and then that is me done. Let me just get the right, okay. Yeah. Right. So yeah, so basically in terms of the campaign, that led to a community of practice, which Common Cause Foundation are generously supporting pro bono. And we're meeting monthly it's fascinating, you know, trying to work out how to embed these values. It's all very well knowing what the theory is, but trying to actually do it in practice. So we had a really interesting, so we're working with, community of practice is volunteer involving organizations trying to embed values framing in their volunteer recruitment and management. You might think that's quite straightforward, but we had a fascinating debate even in one of the first ones where someone was sharing with us a poster. They were trying to recruit volunteers to come to the Greenbelt Festival and promote and talk to festival goers about their charity and, you know, encourage people to engage with it. And the way they were selling it was like, get festival tickets, you know, and it was like they just didn't have the confidence that people would want to do it. We're so surrounded by messages of you'll do this because you'll get something for free, or, you know, and it's really hard to overcome that. And so we tend to do that sort of what Ruth calls spaghetti school of marketing, where it's like, all right, we'll appeal to their values, intrinsic values, but we'll also throw in the free tickets as well, just in case that doesn't work. And the research shows that that's actually counterproductive. You know, let's have faith. We believe that people are good. Let's have faith in it and actually put, you know, I was about to say our money where our mouth is. That's probably the wrong analogy, but community of practice, which we're running on a monthly basis for the minute, and we're looking at how can we embed values through all of our messaging, like, you know, even on the volunteer sign up form or the role registration form, and in all of the campaigning we're doing. We're looking at running a campaign in September. We have some brilliant climate action groups using our service, and we want to run a campaign encouraging people to volunteer for these groups, because I think that'll work really well. There's a lot of people sitting around worrying about the climate and not knowing quite what to do with that. So that's really our next steps. Yeah, so that's it.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Janet. That's fantastic. It was a really, really interesting talk. There's so much sort of meat in there to get one's teeth into. I think the campaign is amazing and ought to continue, and I hope it is. And the work you're doing obviously does continue and goes from strength to strength. So many thanks for that. Amazing. And questions, everyone. Well, let me just unpin you or unspotlight you, and we'll open it up to any questions from anyone. Any thoughts? Any observations? Any questions? I'm just unpinning, unspotlighting. Janet. Okay, Janet, you should be unspotlighted. You aren't on my screen, but anyway, you'll have to put up with the spotlight a little bit longer, maybe. Any thoughts, anyone? Good.
Yeah, I've got just one. Janet, that was great. Thank you. It was just on your last point about language to use with volunteering and getting people involved. I've done a lot of work with charities and digital spaces and donation forms and all of that stuff. And it's actually the entry point for getting people in is the most valuable area. The actual form itself has to be quite clean language, quite clear, because people are just focusing on filling out the form. But it's that what I found, and we've done various sort of research and looked at heat maps and things, so it's where people are going to find the information, and those key call to actions on the homepage, then that's really where it happens. And then as you're sort of filtering people in and then getting that engagement, but the form itself is quite clean. And then the thank you at the end, where people don't normally spend a lot of time, but I've seen, and definitely in charities and donations and for both sort of animals and humans, that's when they get the most also engagement at the thank you page, which is really interesting, especially if you put any video content. So any video content is useful. It was just some thoughts because I've done quite a bit of work on it. So yeah, it's so powerful, the language that you need to be using in that scenario. So yeah, just some thoughts from stuff that I've done before. Yeah.
Thanks. No, that's useful. We're actually just we have to rebuild our site because Drupal upgrade. No one needs to know about the details of that. It's probably not deeply interesting to people, but we do need to do a kind of major redevelopment. And I think the calls to action, it definitely needs some work. And I think that's a really important insight, actually, is that thinking about the values at that moment is really important. Of course, what we're trying to do, we're not just getting volunteers to sign up, we're getting organizations to create roles that people want to volunteer for. So we're trying to influence the whole community of organizations that are using our service to frame their volunteering in an intrinsic way. And that's to do with how they scope the roles as well. So there's a kind of a second layer down, if you like, for those group. But I think, yeah, the call to action is really important.
Any other questions or observations? Anyone want to volunteer? But we're moving, we will move actually quite quickly, if we can, to a general discussion. So there'll still be an opportunity to talk to Janet, but also to the other speakers, to Becky and Jamie and Heidi there as well. So shall we do that rather than, sorry, Janet, I hope you don't feel cut off on that, but there's so much to think about there. I've got some questions to ask you, which I'll try and slip in at some point, but I think let's move first to the panel discussion. And for that, we're going to hand over to my colleague, Neil Tomlin.
Thank you, Charles.
Neil, would you take over?
Yeah, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. The first question that I think appears quite relevant is the question about what makes values shift. And to ask the panel whether they can anticipate where they might be going. So could I ask that question firstly to Heidi for a response?
Shifting values. Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it a little bit in terms of my presentation. We are looking at how we can keep, I guess, the faith and hope elements of what set up our charity as a really solid base, but also then look at how we want to be neutral and inclusive alongside that. So I think that's where we're shifting. But in a more general sense, it was really interesting actually hearing what Janet was saying about volunteers. We have noticed a huge dip in the commitment of volunteers. So a lot of eagerness about getting involved, but not a lot of willing once it comes to actually showing up. So it was so fascinating hearing what Janet was saying. And I think probably a shift for us in terms of what we expect of volunteers and the values of, I guess, commitment to each other. But one I think that's been something on my mind is also a change, and I think a mentality. We talk a lot in society about woke or anti-woke and a lot of this, and I think something that we're seeing it shifting is kind of a desire to remain curious, a desire to remain open to challenge, but a sort of a humility. And I think that's the shift that we're trying to actually instigate rather than just see happening. I'm not sure if I've completely answered the question, but
no, but I think you have. But I'm also interested in where you feel we might be going, where the trend is in terms of the values that are emerging.
I think the post-pandemic world has shifted people's mindsets quite significantly. I don't know how long-lasting that's going to be, but I think the shift is probably something around self-care, which is a really positive thing, but can also be to the detriment of others who need care and attention. And I think much more of like, I've seen a shift in more independence, but a lot less resilience. A lot. For example, I work in youth programming. We noticed with our staff something that we totally didn't anticipate. We knew the young people had had a tough time during the pandemic, but actually we noticed our staff just couldn't cope with long working hours, or wouldn't. Maybe it was more wouldn't cope with long working hours, anticipations to kind of go above and beyond. And I think there's a significant shift in sort of a generation in terms of what is expected of them within workplaces, within voluntary placements, and like we touched on just a minute ago, an expectation that you have to get something out if you put something in. And so I noticed that shift, and I wonder whether actually organisationally we're almost going to come back from that and go, no, we don't want that. We, you know, a lot of us run or work with charities. We rely on people volunteering. We rely on people going above and beyond and going kind of off their own backs and from their own will. And I think the shift will be that we'll start seeing values of like commitment and loyalty being expected within organisations. Just some thoughts.
That's very interesting. Can I turn Rebecca to you, because this question really was generated by your session where you were starting to show some new values like empathy emerging in the corporate world. And of course, from a business perspective, this is highly valuable data if they can anticipate the requirements of employees as they go forward. So again, as an analyst, you must be very keen to try and identify the drivers of any shifts, and also want to know whether it's just a temporary trend or whether it's something that is going to be a permanent change. So perhaps I could ask you the same question from an organization's point of view.
Yeah, thanks so much, Neil. And some of which I'm going to say is very much echoing what Heidi just said. That's why I was nodding, because that's what I thought I was going to say. But definitely there's this shift to empathy and support we've seen in organisations. But I also know that the conversations that are now happening in organisations that was a reaction to COVID, where they realised if they didn't look after their staff, it was going to be even more catastrophic than it was already. And now the conversations are happening, which is, what parts of the practices that we started in COVID are we going to hold on to? How much are we still going to allow remote working or flexible working? How do we handle that with our desire for a more of a team feel, which, you know, some might argue you can only get through being in the office together. So there is, I'm not going to be entirely surprised if the emphasis on support and empathy might dip, might be a temporary shift. But then thinking about the new generation coming in, and this is something that came up again and again in our interviews, is that people are saying, you know, the new generation really care about purpose and meaning in their work. They want to do something that matters to them, and they demand a lot more from work because of that. They want their work to actually mean something. And on the flip side of that, we had some people saying, well, the new generation, they're just not resilient like previous generations should be. And that may be true. I would have to look into that more, but I also wondered to what degree is that because the new generation are just not going to stand for it, that they're, because they care more about meaning and purpose, they've got stronger boundaries perhaps than what we were perhaps more raised to just, you just keep working, you work forever and ever. And the new generation is saying, no, that's not what I want from life. I want more of a work-life balance. I want more of the flexibility with that. So I think that is a shift that probably will stick, unlike the empathy. So those would be my two thoughts. And just to go back to the tenure there as well, that's another shift people are seeing, that the new generation just don't stick in one place like previous generations would, where you'd have 20-30 years of tenure in one company. It's much more common now for the new generation to move around more, and perhaps that is because they get so many years into a company and then go, actually this doesn't align with my values and I can't keep fighting it. You know, lots of questions there that could be explored.
And that's a good point to shift, Jamie, to you, because I suppose in answer, part of your answer to what makes values shift is on purpose and, you know, the passion you showed when you were talking. But do you have any general comments in terms of maybe timescales for where you see the changes you were describing taking place amongst the, you know, the cohorts of on purpose, for example?
That's a really interesting question in terms of the timescales. I don't know, but I have seen changes in short periods of time happen. An example would be greater consideration of where food consumption takes place and how we source our food. And as a little anecdote, I'm vegan, so I eat plant-based foods. I've been vegan for 3 years, and shortly after starting being a vegan, I said to my partner at the time, the day that McDonald's, the day that a big food chain starts making vegan food, like, we know that veganism is permanently on the agenda. People will permanently be trying to consume more plant-based foods because, yeah, if the consumer demands it, big organizations will follow suit. And within 2 years of me being vegan, McDonald's now produce a vegan burger. And not only that, but the way that they produce their soy to make the burger is actually healthy for the soil. So one of the downsides is producing soya is it can damage the soil of the field that it's in. And actually McDonald's worked with plant-based organizations to develop soya, which is very good for the fields it's grown in. And I share this as an example because it illustrates that McDonald's only shifted to having a plant-based burger because it was demanded so by the individual consumers. And they knew they needed to do it authentically to get buy-in from the audience. And since then, they now produce 2 plant-based options on their vegan menu. So it's funny because in some ways you can see these changes happening quite quickly, but in other ways, I think we should be really wary of big organizations and corporates making these changes because a bit like what Becky was alluding to, or not alluding to, that's the wrong word, but talking about, sometimes it's almost like a front and it's almost like organizations are it's actually just a part of risk aversion for them and solidifying their profit generation. So for example, Lloyds Bank were awarded an award for their ways of working strategy. They were deemed as being incredibly flexible for their employers, for their employees. People could work from home during COVID. 2 weeks ago, they changed their policy and are now requiring people to be in the office 4 days a week or something like that. And there's been uproar within Lloyd's staff because it is very taxing and discriminatory on certain members of their employee base. But it just shows that actually these organizations have the power to just pivot to whatever best suits them and actually is the least risk-averse strategy, the one which is most likely to solidify their future. So I can't really say we're seeing these emerging trends or values, because actually I think we're seeing the same sort of values still being in place, but just emerging in different forms. And we just need to be really wary of them and encourage people to try and adopt new values or shift their values to be more humanitarian, more altruistic. And if we can do that, that'd be amazing. It sounds like quite a daunting task, but actually you only need a tipping point. And the tipping point can be as low as 10% of the actors in a system. If we can shift 10% of people's mindsets to be a bit more altruistic, that can shift consumer interests and needs and how large organizations operate. So no idea on timescale. Sorry for the lack of that.
and hands up, I have had one of those vegan burgers, so there you go. Janet, in your presentation, you were talking about the fact that your experience in Reach has been very successful compared to other volunteering organizations recently. And it seems to me that it's very important for you to keep in touch with trends in terms of what's happening. So are there good sources of information you can go to identify shifts in values and looking towards the future? Or is that something that you don't have access to currently?
Yeah, the short answer is no. So I've got no idea.
So where are you getting your feeds from? Because it seems to me pretty important that, like all organizations, we try to look in the future with a certain degree of accuracy.
I think I totally, I would love to be able to plan the future. I think those days are gone. I think we're in an incredibly unpredictable world, a complex world. And I think that, which is why, for example, we've just been developing our strategy and we're moving to, I don't quite know what it means, but it's an adaptive strategy. We're becoming an adaptive organization, and we're going to regularly scan the horizon, look at the data of what's happening, that we can see that's in the trends that are happening within our service, and what's happening in the wider world, and just keep trying to reprioritize. Because I think, you know, the surges that we had, we never anticipated those, and we never could have done, and they weren't on our radar. No one could have thought them through. There's so many different factors that contribute to them. And I think the world is, you know, we're going to have more crises, right? Remember the last one, they're going to intersect, and issues like trust are going to be massively important. It's really hard to know how it's going to play out because there's so many different actors. So that's my slightly less hopeful, well, not hopeful, I think it's realistic assessment. I mean, I'd love to know, one thing we could be measuring, right, is what is motivating people to sign up and volunteer right now. And we're not collecting that at the moment, because I think it's quite hard to do that in a way that's meaningful. If you just give people surveys, you don't necessarily get meaningful information. But I would love to explore that, and we will keep looking for sort of a way of investigating that more deeply. I certainly recognise the trends that Becky and Heidi were talking about in terms of organisations, the kind of the balance, right, between being really inclusive and supportive of staff and then needing to recognise the needs of the organisation, and, you know, kind of where does that end up, and where's the sort of right expectation of resilience of people. Yeah, in terms of understanding and being able to predict what those trends are, we're totally, I think the best we can do is just keep our eyes open and keep making sure that we're being really intentional about assessing what's going on, and then thinking through what that means for where we're at.
Well, maybe Becky, that's something you can help Janet with, because this seems to be that there's going to be additional demand for your services. I was going to move on to just really probably in terms of time, my final question, which was around communication. And I'm not going to, if anyone on the panel would like to answer this, and it was a question of whether we need to be smarter in the ways we communicate values, in terms of sometimes pushback is a reaction where it's quite easy to start presenting them in a sort of a preachy form, which is a turn off to people. And again, one of the things that's come out today is about the language we use. So can I invite the panel to have any comments or thoughts they have about what they see as successful strategies in communicating the values that we're all here today about? So if I can open that up to the panel, that'd be really good.
Well, one sort of quite short practical tip for that we're looking to use, which is just about normalizing it. So showing that lots of other people are doing it, or acting from that value, because it does a couple of things. It sort of reduces that perception gap, makes it feel like it is worth doing something because other people are doing something, and that it's a normal thing to do. And it sort of therefore it does that dual thing of priming that value for other people, and also closing that perception gap and feeling like, okay, so if I contribute to and other people are together, that will create something much more significant. So I feel like normalizing it, maybe through stories of other people doing it. How you do that really well, of course, because stories can sound a little bit cod if you're not careful, but sharing stories, for example, is a really effective way.
But Janet, apart from your own organization, have you got anyone in mind who you feel does that very well at the moment?
I think Global Action Plan are doing some nice work in that area. I think there's probably some other examples, but I can't think of them right now. I'll mull them over.
Any other comments from the panel on that question around the use of language and communication of values?
I think we found it helpful to have a little explanation after what our value term was, purely because words can mean different things to different people, and so we felt the need to explain what we meant by the value that we'd assigned, and we, open to challenge, but at least if we've explained where we understand it fitting or how we see that impacting us, then there was a chance for a conversation rather than it just triggering or hitting someone in a different way. So maybe we need to get more descriptive about what it means for us internally when we pick something.
Right. Does anyone else have anything to say, just opening it up?
Has Sally Breton has got her hand raised. I don't know.
Cool, then go ahead, Sally.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I think language is really important, and I think we tend to see, you know, individual words rather, and like Heidi was saying about adding things to it to make it into an action, so people can see that they have to do something about it. So words in itself aren't actionable, and to be able to do them. So I think that language and ensuring that we're verbalizing and humanizing that action in order for people to play a part of it is really important. So we add and are beginning to add more language and intent into our values, so that people feel that they can do them and achieve them, rather than these sort of individual words.
And do you feel in relation to that it would be helpful if there were more formal, or there was one acknowledged definition of values? Do you think that would help the communication process? I appreciate there are various definitions of values, but I'm wondering, I'm asking the question whether that would be helpful in terms of open communication or not.
I think it would be helpful. You know, it's one of our values. St. John is accountable, but that can mean something very different for different people. And it's actually, are you accountable to, or are you holding people to account? And so it's about understanding as an organisation actually what you're wanting from that word. So I think a basis of understanding would be really good, and generally with check, and that it doesn't have to be from a charity sense. So I think across organisations, I think it would be good to have some sort of basis of understanding so that we can aim for it. But it is applicable sometimes in different situations. And I constantly struggle sometimes when people use that and it's not under my values of being. So accountable for me is me being accountable for myself and ensuring that I support my team, but I also hold people to account for behaviours and actions. So yeah, it's an I could go on, but I love this, so thank you.
Well, unfortunately, we probably could go on for hours, but I've got to hand back to Charles, I think, to have some concluding remarks.
Yeah, well,
thank you very much for all your answers.
Thank you, Neil. And I think if anyone wants to add anything, the chat is still open and will be for the remaining time that we're here. And there's some comments I see coming in. Bryony, thank you for that comment. Just to move towards the wrap up then, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you very much for our speakers, and to all of you really for being here. I think the feeling I'm left with at the end of these 4 very interesting talks and the discussions that we've had around it is actually some cautious optimism, really, because I think that people's values are there. They've always been there. I don't think values necessarily are going to change. That's my own personal take. But I think people are becoming more aware of their values, and I think that's the evidence that we've seen in different ways from all of our speakers. And for reasons which actually Janet touched on and others touched on, we're getting to be a bit more confident and courageous about acting on those values. So the awareness of values and the acting on the values, as we know, is the key. And if you know, I think for instance, the Change the Story campaign was fantastic because it focused on that. There've been various other campaigns that have done a bit like that, including the Global Action Plan campaign in schools, which has tried to, I won't mention that was a sponsored campaign, I won't mention the sponsor, but at least it was a big organization getting involved in values. And trying to change children's awareness of values is so important. Starting early and getting them to understand that other people, other children, do have good values. They do have the same sort of intrinsic values as the compassionate values that we have too. And that can help to give us the confidence to express our values, to act on the values. And I think just events like this, and dare I say it, the UK Values Alliance and other organizations like it that are spending time, as all of you are in your different ways, in spreading the word on values and acting on the values and being courageous enough to do that. I think that all is gradually and incrementally changing. I think the climate is changing, and I think we have a lot to be optimistic about. So but I'm going to hand over to Alan to add his views, closing views before we close out. But I think I'd say that if you want to help us in our efforts to try and do that, do take an interest in UK Values Alliance. Even come and join us. If you want to know how to do that, just go to the website, and it's easy. But email me, Alan, Neil. My email's on the Eventbrite link that you got, I think. And so get in touch, help us do it. We're just, guys like you, just trying to collaborate together to get this particular message out. Thanks very much, everyone. Alan, over to you.
Thank you, Charles. And to save you any steps in the process, just in the chat there's a direct link. All you have to do is click on it and sign up as a member. That's simple. Now, to finish, there's 2 minutes. So I'm just bowled over by the speakers today. And when I was listening to each of them, there were, funnily enough, 2 topics that came out for each. And it struck me how there seems to be a cumulative effect when each of these 2 topics are together rather than separate. So for Heidi, it was the power of action at the same time as listening, and those 2 together being so powerful. Then for Becky, it was data, but context. So being able to apply the data in context that really created that power. Then for Jamie, it was the combination of the system, but also with hope. And when you put those 2 together, you suddenly got a superpower there. And then finally, Janet, this combination of awareness on the one hand with positivity, and the 2 together, again, creating that additional energy. And then just a final thought from the panel discussion. It struck me that over time and in the past, perhaps the voluntary sector looked to the corporate sector for learning, how do we run our organization better? Whereas because of the changes in terms of the relationship and the psychological contract between the employer and the employee, I'm thinking actually that corporates are going to be looking to the voluntary sector and say, how do you motivate your people? Because they seem not to be listening to us anymore. So they're just some final thoughts in the way of saying goodbye. And I hope you've enjoyed this birthday party and that we'll see you joining the UK Values Alliance. And like I said at the beginning, perhaps we'll be together again in a year's time. Thanks very much.
If not before. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a lovely rest of your day.
Bye.
Great speaking to you
Bye.
today.
Bye.